Councillor Kewen. Sorry? I don't know why. Is there something wrong with the speaker system?
Just checking. Try now.
Is that better? Is that better? Well, I've switched it on. There's nothing more that I can do. Can we turn it up a bit?
Yeah.
Oh, hello. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
All right. All right, so there's an apology from Councillor Kewen. Would someone like to move that? Yanni?
I didn't move it. I just had an apology for early departure.
Oh, and Yanni
Possible
for early departure.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in that category? No? So Yanni will move it, seconded by Jimmy Chen. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. We've got no declarations of interest in the open agenda, so we'll move on to public participation and welcome Therese Arsenault and Gretchen Laroche from Christchurch Symphony Orchestra. Thank you both for coming.
Oh, well, thank you very much for asking us here this morning. We've really been looking forward to coming today to tell you about some really exciting plans that the orchestra has. So I guess really what we're here to talk to you as one of our major stakeholders, and we've been sharing this great vision with our other stakeholders, Creative New Zealand as well, and the foundation of the CSO. So what we're really talking about is, I suppose, the changing role of orchestras globally, where they're broadening their purpose, they're extending out beyond the concert hall, getting out into their communities, using the great knowledge and resources that are housed within the orchestral infrastructure. And that's what we're talking about. We actually have a vision to be at the forefront of this movement, to be absolute world leaders in this. So currently we're operating, as you're probably aware, quite a dynamic community engagement program already, but we believe we can do better. So what our vision is a 50-50 orchestra. So what this means is half our time is spent performing and giving concerts, and half our time is actually spent out in the community delivering community engagement programs. Now we've arrived at this idea simply based on need and demand. So what we have at the moment, we can only really meet about 1/3 of the requests that we're fielding for people to participate in our community engagement program. So this is very much driven by need. And just to give you an idea, a practical sense of what does a 50-50 orchestra look like, so a snapshot of the 7 days in the CSO right now. On Saturday, we had a concert at the Charles Lunny Auditorium with the visiting international cellist Wolfgang Schmidt. It was a great concert, and the critics said it was packed with energy and vitality and animation. And this week, and no, I wasn't playing. And this week we've got musicians that are spending the entire week at Banks Ave School in Dallington, and they're working with all of the students in the school, each class creating projects that they'll perform at the end of the week. Now we particularly picked Banks Ave. We're very interested to go and work there because we're very keen to actually evaluate the impacts of music, especially the long tail impacts, especially with young students that are suffering post-quake impacts. And so Banks Ave was a good school to look at this. We're working with Kathleen Liberty. Some of you may have seen some of her research that came out the other week talking about some of the impacts on young students. So we're looking to actually be able to quantify the benefits of these music programs. But to give you a practical sense of what we're talking about here, of some of these outcomes that we believe we can get from these programs, on day 2, the teachers were already commenting that there was a palpable change in dynamic within the school. There was a lift in the school, and this is through the creative pursuit of everyone working together. But also on day 2, we saw quite a turnaround in one of the young students there who suffers quite significantly from autism and is very socially isolated within the school, struggles as very sound sensitive, and also doesn't communicate a lot. They weren't sure how he'd get on. By day 2, the student was actually sitting in front of the drums, and not only was he getting stuck in and working with the others in the breakout sessions with the other students, he was actually leading that. He was actually really encouraging the others, coming up with lots of ideas and helping them get on and come up with activity. So we can see that actually these sorts of music programs we're offering has profound change. So what we're talking about with our new vision is using music as a platform to contribute to enhanced social outcomes for the city, and that includes working with people on the margins of society. There'll be an emphasis on equality of opportunity, identifying and reducing barriers to experiencing and participating in the arts, enhancing the quality of life through the arts and in particular music, and responding to the areas of need. So that's not us developing programs and taking that out, that's looking at where can we help and assist. The program itself will have 6 strands. Encounter, providing audiences of all ages with opportunities to experience live music in a variety of ways. Our Karawhiya Let's Play program, this is intensive creative residencies based in primary and intermediate schools. Platform, creative music-based programs within prisons and justice facilities. This builds on the work we've already been doing this year. Flourish, health and well-being through music with a particular focus on youth mental health and the ageing community, including those with dementia. Amplify, this is building on our existing partnerships to work alongside the disabled communities, providing opportunities to experience and participate in music-based arts experiences. And the 6th strand is Tune Up, and this is developing skills of musicians of all ages and abilities. So perhaps if you've played an instrument in your past and that instrument's still under your bed, we want to work with you and have you come and join our Rusty Musicians Orchestra.
Except the recorder.
So we have a 2-stage plan, and we're looking to start to implement this from 2019. Now, we're actually not planning on coming to the council to ask for more money to fund this. We actually will believe that we'll be going out into the private sector for this. We've already road tested this, and we think there's very good response and potential support for this. We believe in this program so strongly that the foundation of the CSO has committed to significant seed funding for the first 4 years of this. But we are looking for the council to continue their commitment to the CSO. We want to work with you in partnership to ensure that we can really deliver the best possible outcomes and make the best contribution that we can as an orchestra to the city and its residents. We'll be very happy to come back and to dig down into this in more detail and also to work with council staff. So this new vision will enable us to establish deeper and more meaningful connections, building ongoing programs, not just the one-offs that we tend to offer now. At the CSO, we have a saying that music belongs to all of us, and we really want to do our best to make that a reality for everyone in this city. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got some time for questions, but thank you for a very powerful presentation. I'm a great believer that music, within music we find a number of solutions that are nothing to do with learning an instrument, and but it's about working as part of a team. It's about developing confidence, self-confidence, and it's also about realising that unless you're in tune with everyone else, that doesn't sound quite so good. So Glenn.
Thank you. Have you looked at the Sistema Aotearoa model which has been used in South Auckland?
Yes, I have, and in fact actually I went over to the UK as well on a Winston Churchill Memorial Fellowship earlier this year to actually look at what orchestras over there are doing in their communities, and they operate a program that take some of the ideas of Systema, but they've adapted it more for the UK schools. This is actually a very interesting program they're offering called In Harmony, and I'm very interested to look at potentially a hybrid model here. So the main difference is Systema works outside of the school environment. In Harmony works within a school environment, so you can utilise the existing community and infrastructure of a school. I think that actually something like this could be a very, very beneficial thing to happen in Christchurch. There's incredible social outcomes that comes from this program and incredible benefits for the wider neighbourhoods as well. So I really wanted to delve into this, so I did actually do a 360 around this, talking to students, talking to parents, talking to the arts organisations delivering this, but also talking to the principals about why they've gotten on board with this.
Some very talented young people in Aranui. It'd be great to connect up with Graham Wardrop, Mary Chetty, others, you know.
Yeah.
You?
Yeah.
Yeah, the Salvation Army also has used their brass band
yes.
to bring young kids from not just Aranui but a wide range of quite low socioeconomic area schools, and they have flourished in that environment. So I've seen it firsthand. Phil?
Just in terms of those connections, I don't know if you're aware, but there's a group of music therapists have set up to work particularly with older people who have dementia, and I'm just thinking that the work you're doing could give them wonderful backing.
Yeah, we've actually been working with them and in touch with them. So, yeah, I think this is really key as part of the vision. What we've discovered too is over the more than 17 years we've been doing this work, we've built up a lot of connections and partnerships and relationships. And the beauty of what we're talking about here, it gives us certainty to really grow and build on those existing connections that we have. So we're not starting from zero here. We're building on 17 years of firm work, but actually this gives us the flexibility to look at adapting it further. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, and you know, thanks to the foundation for making that strong commitment for the seed funding for the 4 years. I had a meeting with Creative New Zealand just recently, and they talked about the model of their support, which has cornerstone organisations that they support, and also so the totara, and looking for that leadership, and then the ka hikatea, which you are on that track with CNZ, and I'm just thinking that part of our review of our funding streams ought to be looking at that idea of what is the cornerstone for a city, and certainly I view the CSO as very much a part of that. So thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you for having the vision for taking it out of the comfort space of the orchestra performance to the wider community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Right, now we have Wayne Hawker with a 5-minute presentation.
Good morning, I am Wayne Hawker, a long-term resident and strong community advocate for the community of Phillipstown. Thank you for allowing me this time to address the City Council over my concerns in regards the proliferation of alcohol outlets wanting to open up in Christchurch. At the present time, there is a serious concern for me that they are currently targeting the eastern side of town, with a proposal for a new liquor land being considered in Phillipstown. As many know, Phillipstown is regarded as a low socio-economic community in Christchurch. It is rated a 9 out of 10 on the government's current deprivation scale. This on its own brings serious issues for the community to deal with without having to deal with an overexposure and the easy access of alcohol to many vulnerable people living in Phillipstown. We already know that there is a liquor store approximately 30 metres from the proposed site. We have identified at least 18 liquor licence sites within an approximately 2.5 kilometre radius of the proposed site. We as a community are saying enough is enough. And while we will formally lodge an objection to any licence application being lodged, we are to some extent limited in what we can object to the fact that there is no formal local alcohol policy in place. That would actually add considerable strength to any objection. Furthermore, there is very confusing guidelines as to who is entitled to lodge a formal objection. Anyone who wants to object must prove that they have a greater interest in the general public in putting in a submission, and this is where the confusion lies. It appears you must live fairly close to any proposed site to be a person, or be a person with a special involvement in organisations such as churches, schools, community organisations, etc., to have a chance to be considered as someone entitled to object. But it appears to me that what is seriously lacking is the opportunity for one of the most powerful voices that could object being able to do so. That voice is that of victims who have been harmed in some way by alcohol. Surely of anyone, they would have the greatest interest over the general public, and there should be something included in the local alcohol policy to recognise this fact, or the council could ensure that their local licensing authorities are given guidelines to include objections from such people. I have read online the council's provisional local alcohol policy dated the 29th of September 2016. I like the intent of what you are trying to achieve, and I am aware there is a process that has to be followed. But then we, as ratepayers, when are we going to have this policy in place to give us as communities more teeth to take on those who wanted to continue to flood our communities with liquor stores just because they can? My understanding, there were appeals against some aspects of the provisional licence policy when it was presented, but this did not involve the section regarding off licences. Is there any way the council can consider formally adopting in part the local alcohol policy while continuing to work on reaching a common ground place with those who are opposing the other parts of the policy? This will then give communities such as Phillipstown the teeth we need to take on head-to-head businesses that want to continue to flood communities with alcohol, because at the present time it is heavily stacked in their favour. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, obviously the LAP is going through a process. There are appeals, and no, you can't implement part of it ahead of the rest of it. And yes, there are appeals on the off licence as well. So I'm sorry, but that's the way it is. So thank you very much for your presentation. Yep. Right. Now I'm going to move to deputations by appointment, which we haven't received any, presentation of petitions, and we're moving now to item 23, which is Redcliffe's Park and Redcliffe School proposed land swap. It's a hearings panel report in front of us, and I'd like to invite the chair of the hearings panel to present the report.
Thank you very much. So the hearings panel has supported the proposal, and with some additional recommendations and requirements which you'll see are picked up in the resolutions which are in front of us today. So recommendation 2 picks up matters raised in submissions relating to particularly amenity values, and it means that the project around view shafts at Mowbone Cave can be picked up in a joined up way with the work that the Ministry are doing, and obviously the aspirations of the community expressed through the master plan. Recommendation 3 allows council staff and the community board to consider structures which exist on the school site at the moment, which may have value to the park, so that there's the opportunity for council staff to work with the ministry and obviously work with the community through the community board to ensure that where there are structures which have value to the park, those can be retained. And the commitment from the ministry is that the area of demolition in the park will be grassed and made good, so that what the council gets, what the community gets by way of the new park, is a finished site with as many of the structures which are currently there, which are desired to remain, able to remain there, so that they add value, amenity to that new park. We've also raised expectations that the ministry will contribute to the costs which are incurred by council as a part of the transfer of the park from the existing park site to the existing school site. And of course there are items which need to be added to the park, which are replacements which wouldn't necessarily have been programmed for renewal at this time. So there may be depreciated values which wouldn't be as much as the cost of replacing, for example, playground equipment. But our expectation is that the Ministry would contribute to that difference in cost. And there are pedestrian safety and traffic management issues which are brought about by the move of the school to the new school site, the existing park site. And again, the expectation that's raised by the hearings panel is that the Ministry should contribute to those, and certainly comments made by the Ministry at the hearings suggest that those are realistic expectations on our part. We were concerned by submissions from users of the park, particularly sports groups who were concerned that through transition there may be a time at which the existing park wasn't available to them and that the new park wouldn't yet be finished. We've certainly picked that up by way of recommendation 9, and our hope is that the timing of the development on both sites can be such that there is some period of crossover so that there's no drop in the level of service and no break in continuity of service for those sports groups. Some of that may of course relate to timing, when there are times of the year that particular sports codes are not needing to use the park as well. This has been a really difficult issue for the Redcliffs community over a long period of time. It's been well canvassed in the media, and councillors will be very aware of the frustrations and sometimes anger in that community, which has been going on for some time. One of the things that we heard loud and clear from submitters was that there's a need for certainty, and in many ways, as long as the outcome is that Redcliffs gets its school back, certainty is one of the most important things. And there were other options that had been put forward that could possibly have been considered. It became very clear when we heard the verbal submission from the Ministry of Education, and certainly when we read the detailed information in the report and the other papers were put in front of us, that if Redcliffs is to get certainty around getting its school back, and if we're able to do what we need to do to provide that certainty to the community, then approving what's in front of us, approving the committee's, the hearings panel's recommendation is absolutely the way that we can do that. To do anything other than that not only risks early certainty, but also risks that a replacement school wouldn't in fact be built in Redcliffs at all. And there were some submitters who were submitting against the proposal, who did prefer alternate sites, or who hadn't been happy with the process which had been undertaken by the Ministry in the earlier stages. But in many ways, those submitters in the end realised that they supported a school, and the way to get that school is to support this proposed land swap which is in front of us today. So in speaking to the recommendations from the hearings panel, I strongly recommend those to councillors today. This is an important step in the process that gets the school back for Redcliffs, that sees a school rebuilt, and in fact this is the only way that we can provide certainty that Redcliffs will get a school, and that can happen within a time frame that we know that the community are comfortable with. My belief is that this is supported by a broad section of the Redcliffs community, and that this is the way that we can show our commitment to that community in terms of providing that new school for Redcliffs.
So you'd be happy to move the recommendations?
Very happy to move.
Seconder, Sarah Templeton. Would you like to speak? Who wants to speak to the... Ask a question of whom?
Well, the hearings panel.
Okay. All right.
I note that there's a number of submissions that talk about going back to the main school, the existing school site, and even I think the Board of Trustees of the school and the information that we've been given had made that request to the Minister. So did the hearings panel consider the possible change of government and the uncertainty around perhaps a different outcome in a few weeks' time?
The hearings panel certainly considered uncertainty. And providing certainty to the community was one of the drivers in coming up with the recommendations that we did. Yes, we did consider the possibility of going back to the existing school site. The Ministry, through their submission, made it very clear that that was not an option which was being considered by the Ministry, and that the proposal by the Ministry to rebuild the school on the park site was the only proposal that would bring the certainty that the community made it very clear they wanted. So we considered other options, but we did rule those out quite quickly because all of them were surrounded by a level of uncertainty that I don't believe the community would be comfortable with. No, we didn't consider what the outcome of the election would be because in the broad context of our considerations, all that did was lead to more uncertainty and an inability to make a strong recommendation as we needed to coming out of this process. So, I mean, that may be something that councillors want to take into account. It wasn't something the hearings panel took into account to a great extent because our motivation was to provide certainty to the community. That was what we heard through a lot of the other submissions.
Well, in fact, if you read all of the documentation that was attached supplementary to this advice, the ministry said that if we said no to this, they would immediately start looking at the Barnett Park option. So
I know what the ministry have said, but I also know that the ministers have been directing the ministry. It's been very clear that the ministers have been making these decisions. And I just wondered, with the possibility of a new minister for the sake of 2 or 3 weeks.
2 or 3 weeks? You think a government will be formed in 2 or 3 weeks? Okay.
Yeah, the Board of Trustees and the principal of the school submitted strongly in support of the proposal which is in front of us today, and we certainly heard those submissions loud and clear.
Cool. And then just the question I had for council staff or for the hearings panel is I couldn't see it wasn't very clear what the bulk and design of the school would be on that park in terms of the intrusion, the visual amenity impacts. There was some comment to it being quite high off the ground. So did you get any shading models or any sort of diagrams of what the visual impact would be, other than you've got very indicative ones in here that don't seem to give much clarity over that?
Yeah, the panel was concerned about the sort of issues you raise, particularly in the context of some of the submissions from neighbouring residents and certainly some of the submissions relating to the amenity that the park offered to the wider neighbourhood, some of the things that they were picking up in those submissions. We also took quite a lot of legal advice as a panel as to what was within the scope that we were to consider and what was outside of the scope. And of course, the recommendation is around the land swap. There are planning requirements and planning regulations that pick up the issues around built form and the look and feel of the new site. And we were certainly provided with a level of confidence as a panel that those planning requirements would pick up exactly the sort of issues that you raise. But we also in our discussions with the ministry and in hearing what they said to us, were provided with a level of confidence that the ministry was at least cognizant of the issues around amenity and the built form and urban design of that new site. But the advice that we received as a panel was that those were matters that would be considered as part of the planning requirements, rather than that was something that we should consider as a substantive issue for the panel.
Glenn?
Well, I wondered whether Sarah wished to speak next.
Okay.
As a local councillor, you go for it.
No more questions.
Okay. Yep.
Okay.
Sarah?
I just like to start by acknowledging the Principal and Board of Trustees members who are here today, sitting in the audience there watching and waiting, and all of the difficult times that they and the school have been through in the community, and the enormous amount of work and effort and energy that's gone into keeping the school intact while they wait for a decision. While our decision will be today, there's still a long way to go to actually get the school open again, and so I wish them all the best for that work as well. There's been misconceptions around rockfall risk expressed on social media and in the media. I'd like to make sure that everyone's really well aware that actually there is no rockfall risk for the old school site or the new park site. In fact, that the ministry are going to be building a fence to define the new park site and differentiate that between that and the other area that we won't be taking on. There was also some anger in the community at the minister's original decision, but that's not something that we have control over. And I'd like to just acknowledge Yanni's point on that as well, and that the potential for a change in government could potentially change things. But we have no certainty over that. And in fact, while there's been no word from any of the other parties that they would change anything to do with this process, we also have support from the local Labour MP, electorate MP, for the land swap today in her submission. All the reasons that make Redcliffs Park on the waterfront there a really great place for a park also make it a really good place for a school. It's going to be a wonderful environment, and the children talk to us about the potential for more estuary studies and working on environment matters and things like that as part of their normal school day, and that's going to be a real benefit for them. The main road site will be a good spot for a park. It will be much more visible, more highly utilised, and that will be a really good council asset going forward for the community. I'm looking forward to conversations with the community and the community board about how that new park looks and what assets we might like to retain on it. There's the potential for retaining a building in the corner that could become a community facility, and potentially the playground equipment and those kind of things. And so I really look forward to those conversations and would urge people to vote in favour. Thank you.
Glenn.
And it was good to be part of the panel with my colleagues, particularly in light of the QE2 experience. And so recommendation number 10 is along the lines of that kind of negotiation at the highest level to ensure that the recommendations that have come out of the panel are adhered to. So we know that the negotiations will be conducted in good faith, but that is just a way of underlining that. It is important today that we do our part to ensure that what we heard was the heart of the community is put back. So the school is that heart. It's important we put that back today, and that I think we push the go button and give them certainty. So the panel was very cohesive. It could be some of the kind of grievances we heard was cathartic. That was important too. But we had a job to do, and I think we did it quite well.
Yanni.
I can't support this today. I will be abstaining. My preference would have been to leave this on the table until after the election, because I can't see what we have to lose from waiting for a few weeks or another month, because it just seems to me that there's a number of concerns that have been expressed. And I also was on the QE2 hearing panel, and one of the issues that came up was the lack of detail from people being able to make submissions to know what the impact would be. And I think if people are being asked to make submissions on the loss of or the disposal of some green space, and they can't see exactly what's going to be proposed to be put back in its place, then it's really difficult to make an informed decision. And from the diagrams that I've seen, again, it's like QE2. You just get these very big kind of generic kind of blobs on a map, but you don't get much fine detail around what's actually going to go there. I also think that, fundamentally, there's a real risk of putting a school from what was one high hazard area to another, and there's huge risk around flooding and I think tsunami. So I can't quite see the logic in putting it here, other than the fact that the Minister was determined not to go back to the existing site. So perhaps if there is a change of government, I think there would be new opportunities to explore it, and I can't see why we shouldn't wait a few more weeks or a month to just see what the outcome of that is before agreeing to this. I have to say that I have huge sympathy for the school remaining in Redcliffs. I've always been a strong supporter of it staying in Redcliffs. That's absolutely essential and important. I think the other thing, there's a few other things in these resolutions today which do leave me with a bit of concern. Previously when we did QE2, we actually had the report around the sale, but that hasn't come to us. And we're delegating to the Chief Executive around the arrangements, and what we saw with QE2 is that the arrangements changed. Once we'd already made an agreement, the Ministry came back and said they wanted to remove more trees, or different trees, and so I just would have preferred that we actually have the whole documentation in front of us today to be able to actually see what the valuation of the land was and to sign off on that agreement if that's what, at the same time as we make this decision. So it's again, I appreciate the huge amount of work and effort that the community have put into this. As I said, I'm very supportive of the school remaining in Redcliffs, but I think actually we should wait a little bit longer to find out what happens with the general election, given how much of this has been the Minister's refusal to look at the existing site.
I'll just say a couple of words and hand back to the mover of the resolution, but I just simply want to really focus on process. One, I want to express gratitude to the Board of Trustees who wrote to the Council and said right at the get-go when this was on the table, do the both together. Don't leave the community to make a decision about relocating the school without making the decision about getting back a park. And I think with that encouragement, it was an enabling position that the community took. It enabled us to actually bring this paper today. The second element of the process that I want to talk about is the hearings panel. I think it was an exemplary process. I think it enabled the different points of view to be expressed in a way that was, I think, good for and healthy for the community. They're always challenging decisions when you want something that isn't on the table. It's hugely difficult, but leaving this matter to lie on the table was not an option, not at this stage. It just would, I think, be such a huge disappointment after people have invested so much. For many, it is a compromise, but you know, that's what life can be like sometimes. You seek to get a resolution and that involves a degree of compromise. And I should have acknowledged the local Member of Parliament, the Honourable Ruth Dyson, who would have been here other than another commitment, but so I should record her apologies because she would have been here otherwise. And you know, to have that degree of support across the board, I think is also very good. I don't think that we can wait for a general election and the outcome of which is uncertain. This community has asked us for certainty, and I think we should give it to them today. Andrew. And
really just echoing those comments and picking up a couple of things that have come up in the discussion since I introduced the item. We absolutely heard from this community that they want a school back in Redcliffs. We absolutely heard from this community that they want certainty. They want early certainty. In fact, they want certainty now. We can't expect a detailed design of buildings at this stage when we haven't yet approved the transfer of the land to allow this to happen, and I'm hoping that we're about to do that now. But we need to have confidence in our own planning rules around issues of built form, urban design, natural hazards, which pick up the sort of things that we talked about at the panel and which have been mentioned today. Inundation, flooding, tsunami risk and so on. But we have planning rules that take all of those things into account. So waiting is not an option. We've got a responsibility to this community, and it's a responsibility that I believe we need to exercise now. I also would like to acknowledge the School Board of Trustees, the school community and the Redcliffs community who have really been through the mill with this, but this is our opportunity to provide them certainty. We have an opportunity to do that today, and I encourage you to take that opportunity. I know how happy people were in the room at the hearings panel when we made this set of recommendations, and I've got every confidence that the Redcliffs community will be very happy when we make a very clear and certain decision on the back of these recommendations today, and I hope that that's what councillors are going to allow us to do.
Thank you. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. Abstentions? Yanni. Thank you very much. That's carried. Right. The next item on the agenda is the Heritage Incentive Grant approval for the former St Luke's Vicarage, 185 Kilmore Street, Christchurch. It's been to the Social and Community Development Committee, so I'd invite Phil Clearwater to introduce this item.
Look, happy to introduce it, and I'm sure the staff will comment on it too and answer any questions. But it's clear in the report that in fact at the committee level this was a tied vote in terms of supporting the application. I just want to refer to the fact that at yesterday's committee meeting we had discussion around the review. We had a review of the fund and a discussion around the strategy. And while there are some aspects, including accessibility, which might impact on this application, in fact, it's essential that because the application was made under the existing criteria, that we deal with it that way, under the current criteria. So I just think it's important that we, in making our decision, keep that in mind, and perhaps questions. There was a question, I think, raised, Brendan, in relation to the funding table, just to clarify that. That was the only point of clarification, perhaps, that I needed. It was just the date of the funding table.
Yes, on the two tables, the summary of the financial implications, the first one is under point 6.7. It's just those last figures, the total available funds. The figure there is 2016-17. It should be 17-18.
There's a mistake. Yep.
So that's and that's obviously the same on table in 7.1. So apologies for that. That just
thank you.
Slipped through.
Sorry. I just want to focus on central government funding and different funding options rather than just looking at the funding option that's in front of us. My advice is that this particular building has applied for a grant from the Canterbury Earthquake Heritage Buildings Fund, but were unsuccessful as the fund decided to allocate all the remaining funds they had to one project only rather than to several separate projects. So that fund appears to be now exhausted. The second was the Equip Fund, Ministry of Culture and Heritage, but they're not eligible for funding from this fund as they're not on Council's earthquake-prone building list, as this list only relates to commercial buildings. Is that right? Yep. And so the third fund is the Heritage New Zealand Pohere Taonga grant funding, which the owners applied to about the same time as they applied to us, and they've just been awarded $60,000 from HNZPT towards their project. So would that, given that they've only just been awarded that, would that impact on the recommendation that you're making to Council today?
No, because the funding that they're seeking from us is still relatively low percentage-wise of the works that they're actually doing. They're doing something in the order of $1.2 million worth of work. They didn't apply. Through discussions, they knew that they weren't going to be able to apply for 50% of that degree of funding. So they were quite selective as to what they put forward for funding. So the 200,000 approximately that we're supporting here is still much lower percentage-wise than a normal grant that we have the ability to fund up to 50%, but this is something like 26%.
But the granting, presumably you didn't know about the 60,000 being granted, but you knew that they were applying to other funds.
Yeah.
So it makes no difference to your recommendation.
No.
Okay. Other questions? Yanni?
If we were to reduce the grant to 100,000 in light of the other funding commitments we have on, the other funding pressures we have on the heritage grants, what would be the covenants that we could expect?
Well, yes, you would drop from a full covenant down to a limited covenant, so you would have to put a time limit on that. Usually it's around 20 years, somewhere between 10 and 20 years, whereas with a grant of over 150, you get a covenant that's in perpetuity.
Right. So in terms of the government funding, is there any requirements that you're aware of to have a covenant attached to that funding?
I'm not aware of any. Covenants are usually between the council and the owner. So I wouldn't have thought so, but I'm not sure.
So the minimum amount that we could expect a covenant would be 150?
Yes.
So
for a full
that's
covenant.
For a full covenant. there is a partial covenant that's time limited for any grant below 150,000.
And they are different covenants. The wording is not the same. A limited covenant is not as all-encompassing as a full covenant.
Yep. No, hang on, Mike.
Thank you. So if we were not to fund this project, what would happen to it? Would it continue and be completed, or would it fall over?
I actually don't think that we are qualified as staff to answer that question. It's a question for the owners.
So another question, because obviously this is a significant amount, 200,000. Once this property was completed, the works, and the owners or applicants received the grant, could they then just sell that property on without any comeback?
They can sell the property, but remember the covenant is in perpetuity, so it remains with the property. It isn't. Yep. It isn't. It's on the title.
I understand that, but it basically means technically they could sell that property for the money that it costs to do the full works, and potentially just put that $200,000 in their back pocket and walk away. Potentially. I'm not saying they will, but they potentially could do that.
But that's the same with any grant that you award. That we don't.
But this is a significant grant of $200,000.
Yes, but as we said, percentage-wise, they're investing 1.2 million.
Yeah, but it's $200,000 of ratepayers' money. So I'm just saying, potentially, they could do the work and then sell the property, and that $200,000 could go in their back pocket of ratepayers' money.
So if they've done the work, I think it's important. The advice that we would give you is that if they've done the work, the $200,000 of ratepayers' money has protected heritage, because the building will have been seismically strengthened, it will have had all of the upgrade that the funding that is provided for heritage protection is seeking.
Yeah, I'm not disagreeing with that, I'm just looking at how much money we're funding and the potential outcome of that for these people.
Phil?
I'm happy to move the staff recommendations. That's all. I wasn't sure there were other questions.
I have a question.
Yeah, well, we'll do questions first. Dion?
Sorry. As part of the grant that we're looking at giving them, what was it, the other stuff that they were talking about that they were looking to do to actually make sure that public are able to view the heritage fabric of this building? Was there other stuff that they were looking at doing, like helping make sure that the vision or the visual effect of the building is still being able to be seen by Coolmore Street or anything like that?
Yeah, if that's seen as a key issue, then there are means that you can use to preserve the visibility between the road and the building. So we could put items in the covenant. There is a portion of the covenant which allows you to put things in like that would allow protection of the visibility, and obviously that requires the agreement of the owner. It's a covenant is an agreement between two parties, so they would have to agree to that as well. Obviously they would have to weigh up the benefits of whatever restrictions there are in the covenant to the financial gains that they get from the grant.
We have done that before. I remember that in the Littleton building, that actually keeping the, from the roadside, that view was very much a part of the grant process.
Well, I mean, this is a beautiful building from Coolmore Street, and from a heritage perspective, it's a very important building for the city. And I'm just wondering if we can give a steer to that effect somehow. But I don't know the process to be able to do that.
So it would, you could be specific in an amendment to the recommendation. I would also note that staff have a clear understanding that this is something that the committee are seeking, and when we workshop any grant review process with the committee, we'll be exploring that as part of that workshop process.
Okay. So are we able to put something as an amendment into this to actually clearly stipulate that, I suppose, or ask staff to make sure that that's part of a condition to the covenant?
Yeah, you could add a resolution to say that you believe that the covenant should include some mechanism to preserve the visibility of the building from the road. So that could include, for example, obviously you don't want something like a big fence put up along the road boundary, or a big garage put in front of the building and the road.
Yeah. So are you okay with having...
We haven't got a mover and a seconder yet, so I'm going to move to that in a minute. But Mike, did you have another question?
No.
Okay. Any other questions? Pauline?
Just very quickly, just on 6.16 in the last bullet point, that the owners are committed to the continuing use and maintenance of the building. Is that a feeling that you have from these people, that they're actually committed to staying there? And
Absolutely.
Yeah, so
they fell in love with this building. I think they would have had to have taken it on, to be honest, because it's no small commitment that they have made.
Yeah, thank you.
Yep.
I've flagged forward, I'm happy to move it.
You'll move it?
And also happy to include the amendment that Dion is indicating.
You're happy to include that?
Yeah.
And can I second it?
Okay, well, so can we request that the covenant include a mechanism for, so Phil Clearwater, Dion Swiggs, include a mechanism to preserve the visibility of the property from the street? Is that good enough wording for that?
I think Heron's requesting that that's a condition.
Yeah, I think, instead of a mechanism, a condition, yeah.
Okay, cool. So Phil Clearwater, Dion Swiggs. Right, and now Yanni has an amendment.
Yeah.
So amendment number 1 is to reduce the the amendment is to reduce the heritage grant to, what is it?
150,000.
150,000.
Minimum required for full covenant.
So it's really just that we're amending the first line to, or the first amount to 150,000. So the rest would remain the same. Is that right?
Yep.
Yep. Is there a seconder for that amendment?
I'm not going to second it, but I would second it if he dropped it to 75,000.
Is there a seconder for the motion? Is there a seconder to reduce it to 150,000? That's going to fail for want of a seconder. Yeah. So, and you want to reduce it to 75? Do I have a seconder for that? No. No? No? No, we've been advised by staff that he can't. So that fails for want of a seconder. Should have done it pro forma, Anyway. Yeah. So I'll open it up for debate. Phil, Dion, Glenn and Andrew.
So, councillors, when this came to the committee, I actually voted against the full $205,000. And they're the question, I guess, about accessibility, but also particularly, as Mike Davidson has referred to, that question of sort of private gain versus public benefit that was raised. However, I'm actually really clear to now support the full $205,000, and I think that having the additional recommendation there about visibility, that helps. Particularly why I'm changing my mind is that we've had discussion around community involvement with our heritage, and we received, a number of us on the committee received an email from the applicant, and I thought it was quite telling, and I'm not going to quote all of it at all, but there's some lines that I think are really significant. One is, they write, "We do feel a responsibility to make sure that any public funding we may get will have a return for others." And she also adds, "We're doing what we can to preserve the bits of history that the house tells, and we are keen to find ways to give back the support we may get through public funding." And I think it's with that kind of accountability really, but also that in fact that there is a clear indication there that in fact the applicants are open to how in fact the community may really utilise what will be their home. That goes back to the original condition of the building or purpose of the building. It was a vicarage used by a family. It's held in high regard in terms of the heritage qualifications. It's a very strong historical history, both for Ngāi Tahu and for the church. So I'm now fully in support of the recommendations which I've moved.
Okay, Dion?
Excuse me. No, I'm very in favour of this, and the reason I'm in favour of this is when it first came to light about the decision and the owners emailed us all, I actually took it upon myself to go and actually meet with them and go on site and have a look at this building. It is absolutely amazing what they're having to do to keep the heritage fabric of this building, and for us to think that they're going to take public money and then on-sell that and make a profit out of it, it's just not possible, because the amount of money that they're needing to spend on top of what would normally be spent just to protect the heritage here is phenomenal. I mean, right now they've moved the whole building off-site and they're doing the foundations, but they have to have an archaeologist on there 24/7 when somebody's actually touching the ground, just because of the massive amount of significance this has to Ngāi Tahu and the site there. Kaharoa's been there to bless the site. They've been involved with the church to actually document the whole building as they're starting to rebuild it and stuff like that. The amount of energy that these people have to protecting this building and actually making sure that it survives through this earthquake and actually tells the story of early Christchurch, and even blending that into the native Christchurch story as well is really quite phenomenal, and I really appreciate what they've done to try and do this. So in that respect, I really, I would support this, and I'm really keen to see that, that the visual amenity is actually kept on site so that people can actually start to appreciate that building. I actually put it on my Facebook page when we were going to debate it 2 weeks ago. 100,000 people actually looked at that post that I put there. It's one of the most amazing things that's happened on my Facebook page. I've had dozens of messages from people who have either lived there or, lived there, some people were born in that building, and the stories that they were telling about the building itself and all those kind of things was awesome, and it was really cool to sort of see how just one building actually brought so many people to actually having a conversation about their memories of Christchurch and this, the happiness that actually sort of come from that. So I think it's actually a really good story, and actually I think we can incorporate it into the story of Christchurch. And actually it's one of those things, as we look back, we will have things that that will tell a story of what Christchurch has gone through and what it used to be. So I'm really supportive of this, and I hope people are supportive. I've got confidence that from meeting the people that they will do everything in their power to make sure this building lasts for another 150, 200 years.
Thank you. Glenn?
Thank you. I'm keen to see a public return for public money. So I stirred this up at the committee because I was pretty concerned over the substantial amount of public money going to what ostensibly looked like, a private setting. I take on the point made by Dion there over the visibility of the property, but I think that's only part of it. It's about the community openness and accessibility to it. Is it going to be part of a heritage trail? So I'm satisfied with the new information we've received. The owners have heard that what we've said at committee level, and on that basis I'm happy to go with the recommendation today, having voted against it first at committee level.
Anne?
Thank you. Through the excellent engagement process with the heritage strategy that the team have done, the community clearly stated that it wanted to see heritage as a legacy and an inheritance that we have a duty to retain and protect it for future generations. So we are giving money to this project not just for these people, but for this building actually, because these people may not always own this building. It may be sold on, and this building belongs to all of us. So we're putting money into making sure that this building that we own and we belong to and we have an investment is cared for and preserved for all of us. So very in favour of it.
Andrew, then Mike.
Thank you. I think we need to be careful that we don't confuse consideration of this particular grant application with consideration of what changes we might want to make to our heritage grants policy. And I'm certainly aware that there was some discussion, it's been referred to already at the committee, around the requirements of these grants, particularly around public access and public value from the spending of public money. And I certainly acknowledge the note that we've had from the owners of this building, which was referred to by Phil and others, around the realisation of public money and the will to make sure that there's as much public benefit from that as there can be on the part of these owners. But any consideration of what requirement for public access or public benefit there might be in line with these grants is something that would be more properly considered, and I'm sure it will be by the Committee on Good Staff Advice, as any changes to these grants and the way that we administer them are made. The building clearly is one that's got high heritage values, and the report makes it very clear that this is a building that certainly meets the criteria for this fund, and the environment in which we're working, of course, is one that the fund rules are what they are, and the application has been made under those rules. I believe that we're fortunate to have owners like the owners of this building who have got the commitment to preserving heritage, that have got the vision to preserve heritage, and in fact are willing to take the risks inherent in dealing with these kind of buildings, because this kind of project isn't something that's risk-free in anybody's language. The nature of these projects is that they're frustrating and they're long and they're arduous. So I think we're very fortunate to have owners that are willing to invest in these kind of buildings, and it's great that we're in a position as a council to be able to support those owners in caring for our heritage, in making sure that it's preserved for future generations, and certainly in this case, making sure that there is a good recognition of ways that they can bring about public good as a result of what I believe is good spending of public money, which after all has been set aside for this purpose.
Mike Vignani.
Thank you. First of all, I'd just like to correct Councillor Galloway, we do not own this property. It is a private residence and it was bought as is, where is, so they sort of knew what they were going to be getting into, and this is a large sum of money, and I just don't actually accept that this is the right thing to do. I understand that we created a pot of over $700,000 to go towards heritage, and I value the heritage in our city, and I know it does have a very strong place. The problem I see here is we already started this financial year behind the 8 ball by having to approve things last year to take away from that money. This is 28% of the funds for the year, and I already know that the Social and Community Development recommended another approval of $200,000 from this fund, another $200,000, 28%. We'll be going in shortly to October with only 19% left of that funding pot, just 19% with 9 months still to go. I think we need to look at the bigger picture. To me, we've got a problem with this policy and the way it is actually distributed without having a cap amount in there. And I know that it meets the criteria of the policy, but I'm not here just to rubber stamp stuff. I'll need to have a look at it and make sure it's going to work for the city and for the whole year. It is not going to work for the whole year. We've seen it time and time again when we're approving things this year for the next financial year because we just don't have the money. We need to be a little bit more smart of how we're doing this heritage. I was happy to approve this heritage grant if it was actually at a lower amount, so we can actually make this go out further throughout our communities to get more heritage value out there, because there is a lot more heritage projects out there, and there'll be a lot more people coming to the council for this fund, which will be soon empty because we're giving out $200,000 grants. $200,000 grants to private residences. I had to fight, claw over nails to get a small amount of money for a community facility that is going to put huge value into the community. Huge value. And that was a small amount. This is $200,000 of taxpayers' money that we're going to be giving to a private residence. I don't think that is acceptable, and I do not think that is right.
Yanni.
I share the concern with the quantum of funding, and I've read the heritage grants that exist from central government, and for Category 1 heritage buildings that are listed by Heritage New Zealand, which this one is, one of the few that, that will probably come in front of us, it does qualify for financial assistance. So I think the critical thing is to get the full covenant, because a limited covenant, obviously, for a time when you're spending a lot of money doesn't make a lot of sense. So I was happy to reduce the amount, which wasn't supported. So I can't support this quantum of funding. I have real concerns about the whole as-is whereas, where we seem to be picking up the costs that people incur because of this whole as-is whereas business that's going on in the city, particularly around our heritage. I just want to remind councillors that there's, even with a full covenant, there's no assurance that if we have another earthquake, that this building won't become as-is whereas again, and people will be back asking for money to fix it, and we won't have recovered anything. And this is what's actually happened in our city post-earthquake, where we've put heritage grants into buildings, they've been demolished or sold as-is whereas, and we haven't recuperated any of that money. So we do need to be cautious about the quantums that we're putting in. I do support heritage. I think it's really good that you've asked for the visibility from the street, because if you look at this, there's actually a huge amount of vacant land, but I just think that this grant is too much. It should be reduced in line of all the other priorities that we have. We've also got our own heritage buildings, so I love the fact that councils are passionate about heritage. We've put our own heritage buildings on hold because we don't have enough money to fix them, and yet we're giving out money, huge amounts of money, to private heritage building owners. So I do think we need to look at the strategy around heritage in our city. I welcome when that report comes to council. For this particular grant, I think this is too much and I won't support it.
I'll just say a couple of words. I'm supporting this. The amount that this building received from the Heritage New Zealand Fund, despite its Category 1 status, was $60,000. In terms of a $1.2 million contribution, it's not sufficiently significant in the advice that we've received, and I'm accepting that advice to reduce the amount of the Heritage Incentive Grant that we have before us. I just want to remind people that this site has Wahitapu registration. It has historical significance, obviously, for its 126-year association with the Vicars of St Luke's Church, and high cultural significance as a place sacred to Māori as the burial site of renowned Ngāi Tahu Chief Totahi. Now, I don't want to go into the fact that whether that was the correct name for Christchurch or Totahi, the place of Totahi, but that is what people refer to Christchurch as. This is a hugely significant site, and to think of a demolition occurring on this site is not something that I would want to stand by. The vicarage has obviously the architectural significance as one of Robert Speechley's most highly regarded surviving domestic works, and of course, as the report says, the contextual significance is a picturesque mid-19th century dwelling that stands as a reminder of the loss of St Luke's Anglican Church after the earthquake. But the one that just came to mind is that the former vicarage was designed by Robert Speechley, the architect who came to Christchurch with his pupil William Crisp to oversee the construction of the Anglican Cathedral. I mean, in light of the decisions that are going to be made this weekend, I think this is a significant contribution to the heritage of our city, so I'll be supporting the recommendation. So on that note, I will put the recommendation. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. And that's Mike Davidson, Yanni Johansson. Thank you very much, that's carried. The next item on the agenda is the proposed names for New Park and New Legal Road in the East Frame. Can I hand over to the Chair of the Social and Community Development Committee, Mr. Phil Clearwater, who's in a conversation with his colleague, So, Chair, could you please introduce the next report, proposed names for new park and new legal road in the East Front?
So look, I will, but I'll be brief because I think that Russell can explain some of the complications more clearly than I can, because as is in the report, at each sort of stage following the working group, there's never been full consensus around the names, and that's why, and in fact, the committee, at the committee level, we did have consensus, and it was actually unanimous at the committee that we have Raora Park and Huani Lane. But I'll leave obviously the questions and some further explanation from Russell.
Thank you.
There have been two names put forward for the park. One is Raora, which is referred to as the community wellbeing, and the second one is Tuora, which refers to an individual wellbeing. With the legal road, again there was two names put forward. One was Liverpool Lane, and that was in relation to the connection to the past history of Christchurch and Liverpool Street. And the second one is Huanui Lane, which again refers to the community's well-being. So both of those names are put forward, and the Social Development Community Committee voted on Raora and Huanui Lane, or Huanui actually. Any questions?
Are there any questions on this? Yanni?
Oh, thanks. It just wasn't clear from the report what the feedback was from the community board. So my recollection was that the community board preferred Liverpool Lane, which was the preferred name at that point from the working group, and that their other preference was for Tuawera. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. Tuora? Yeah. Can you just confirm what the community board feedback was?
Certainly. The working group went to the community board seminar, and at the seminar there was an informal voting, and at the informal vote the community board voted there were 4 for Tuora and 4 for Raora. They were equal. For Liverpool Lane, it was 5 for Liverpool Lane, and there was 3 for Huanui Lane.
At the time that it was presented to the community board, my recollection was that the working party's view was that Liverpool Lane was the preferred one. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Any other questions? Someone like to move the recommendations? Phil, seconded Sarah. Is there any discussion? Sarah, then Yanni.
Thank you. I'm really pleased that Raora and Huanui have been recommended by the committee here. But it was really disturbing, I think, for me to see in the report under 4.3.2 that in 2017 we should be saying that Raora there was a disadvantage in choosing Raora because some people might find it difficult to pronounce. And in 2017, where people don't have any problem with Waimakariri, with Huranui, and with multiple names that we have many of our community centres now with Māori names gifted as well. I don't think that should be a consideration. The central city is full of English bishoprics, and there is very, very few chances that we ever have to rename streets and to recognise actually what is a much earlier history for Christchurch City than Liverpool Lane and other bishoprics. And so I think that having a Māori street name in our central city is a really important step forward for us, and really urge everyone to support it today.
Thank you. Yanni.
Don't support the current recommendation.
Dion?
Yeah, unfortunately I wasn't actually at that community board meeting, so my preference would have been for what's actually been recommended to us today. So from that perspective, I support the recommendation.
Okay. All right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. It's just Yanni and David East. Thank you. That's carried. Next item on the agenda is review of the terms of reference for the social and community Development Committee and Housing Task Force. I'll let you introduce it, but moved by Phil and seconded by Glenn. Right, Phil.
So one of the major changes with these is we've, especially because of the importance of housing for people who are homeless, but housing altogether, we have established, as you'll see in the report, a housing subcommittee. It strengthens that. That is really the main change, and accordingly, some of the terms of reference are altered too. And there's clear reference here, though, in the report that if, in fact, those changes were to impact on any of the other committees, well, the changes could be made accordingly. So I'm happy to move the recommendations.
That's fine. Glenn?
Very supportive of this. We need to, one of the reasons we've needed to do this is to bring it in line with LGA requirements, but it also serves to give housing issues a greater profile in the city, and there's a lot of work going on in the background. Early meeting this morning over, future homeless models, for instance. We still, well, I personally want to pursue, subject to the outcome in Wellington, the housing warrant of fitness. I think we need to keep hold of that. So there's a lot in there, and we just want to get cracking.
Very good. Any other discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Next one is impact on business from Council Works. I can't remember, Raph, whether you were chairing that meeting or whether Andrew was. Andrew, can you present the report?
Yep, I'm certainly happy to introduce this item. So there was some good discussion at the committee, and there was a variety of views expressed. The committee was quite rightfully concerned about the effects of roadworks on businesses, and it became quite clear as the discussion progressed that a significant amount of work has already been done, and that there's a clear commitment from staff to continue to engage with businesses and to improve engagement not only during construction projects but also prior to construction works taking place, including matters like alternative pedestrian access, car parking considerations, and so on. The committee by majority did agree with the staff recommendation, but the committee recommendation is in fact more explicit than the recommendation we had from staff regarding requirements for liaison and engagement by staff and by contractors as part of the procurement process. So that's reflected in paragraphs 3A to 3C in the recommendation, and requests a report back, a regular report back in conjunction with the capital watch list, which is expressed at item 4 in the recommendation. So whilst there was a desire at the committee on the part of some to go further than this, it became quite clear that any way that we could or would do that may turn out to be quite unworkable. What we have tried to do is to work with the staff recommendation, but I think to strengthen that to the greatest extent possible so that we can have a good level of confidence that where businesses are affected by roadworks, we and the contractors do everything that we possibly can to make sure that those effects are mitigated, and that we work with the businesses, including work before the roadworks take place and picked up in procurement processes to ensure that that happens as well.
All right, so you're happy to move it?
Yep.
And I'll second it, so it's on the, I've just got to move it and second it, but are there questions first? Dion, did you have a question or? No. Yanni?
There was something in the media the other day about contracts being signed where contractors don't have to work under a certain temperature, and I just wondered whether we'd considered any sort of requirements when we give the licences to occupy or do roadworks on our roads around the reasonableness or unreasonableness of certain conditions that tend to lead to huge delays, as we're seeing in the accessible city.
The reference to temperature is probably related to sealing work. You can only seal down to a certain temperature, and then the work that you undertake will not be effective because of the level of the cold level. Basically, the bitumen will go off too quickly. In terms of the 3 processes we have formally in place for temporary traffic management, licence to occupy the road reserve, and the corridor access requests, which are when people dig holes in the road, we're limited in terms of the conditions we put on those, but obviously when we review them, we do review the impact on adjacent property and can put conditions on whoever holds that permit to abide by, but that wouldn't extend as far as the conditions we would put in their they may put in their contracts for a company like Kinetics, etc. That's a contractual arrangement between them and whoever's doing the work for them. But they would be expected to comply with any conditions that are on whichever consent they get.
Do we look at the time of year in which they propose to do the work and whether it's reasonable to do it, e.g. a construction program over the middle of winter when temperatures mean that it's a lot less likely that you can do the work in the time?
Again, we are limited by the corridor access legislation in terms of service providers. We are basically just custodians of the road corridor in that environment, and we are required by that legislation not to impede unreasonably the service providers using our road reserve.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions? David?
Look, I realise we sort of live under an increasingly health and safety oriented environment, but I'm just interested with a lot of our roadworks. There's been a tendency for contractors to put out their equipment and their roads, cones and everything, and then they might sit there for days before they start. And the other thing is we will have half a kilometre of cones for a very small bit of work. How are we managing that sort of process at the moment, the overkill of road cones in relation to the size of the project and the practice at times of setting things up and then not doing anything for days?
Certainly CTOC are increasingly working with the applicants to utilise proactive traffic management, which really is exactly what you described, rather than just setting out the worst case scenario and then leaving it there for 6 weeks, being proactive about reducing it when it's not necessary at such times as weekends. And we've had complaints because of signs being left on the side of the road and face down and so on. That was a result of that proactive management, that contractor went in and just turned all the signs round at the weekend. I guess it wasn't fully understood the reasoning behind it, but certainly CTOC are more working with contractors about putting that extra effort into changing the arrangements when it's not necessary to protect their workers. But we do have to be mindful that there are hazards to motorists on the site. Even though the workers might not be there, there are still open trenches and so on, so we can't so there's the two aspects to the health and safety side. There's the safety of the workers and the safety of the road users they have to bear in mind.
Now, hopefully we can get over the overkill at times. You might have several hundred metres of cones for a small road repair in the middle of a bit frustrating at times.
Again, the contractors have their own health and safety plans. We try and work with them, but it is their responsibility, and so frequently the handbook of temporary traffic management is seen as a code of good practice throughout the country. So a lot of contractors are reticent to go below those recommendations because it might expose them to risk should there be an event of some form.
All right, I'll open it up for debate. Andrew, do you want to lead off?
I was certainly very comfortable with the committee's recommendation on this. I think it's a pragmatic approach to something that we know has been a big problem. I also think it's important that we look at this in different contexts as well. We've heard a lot recently around the way that roadworks have impacted in the central city, but of course suburban projects are also significant when it comes to the effect of roadworks on small businesses. I'm comfortable that we can pick this up through the procurement processes. I'm comfortable that we can work proactively with businesses. The solution for one business might be quite different to the solution for another in terms of alternative parking or what accesses are needed. There may be things that we can work in around times of day. There may be businesses which are busier in the evenings, and there's something that we can do while the roadworks are actually not taking place. So this certainly allowed us to have a very good discussion about something which has been a high-profile issue at the committee, and I think we've got to a reasonably pragmatic solution, and I'll certainly be looking forward to getting those report backs that are referred to in item 4 so that we can continue to monitor the way that this is working.
Dion?
Actually, I'm just going to want to, before I start, echo something that Councillor Rest was just saying, that on St Asaph Street over the last weekend, there was a small work site on the footpath, and they closed off the entire road and made it one way because there was a small hole on the footpath.
There's a one-way street.
No, it's not. No, it's not.
Just
it's a two-way part of the street. It's close to where I live, so I actually had to go. It was actually really annoying because they closed off the entire street, made one small spot just to do a footpath little hole, and it was covered over by a piece of metal and left like that the whole weekend. These things are actually happening in our city, and it actually is absolutely disgraceful that disruption that this stuff causes for people, when it actually, common sense makes it just seem unreasonable. And that's where unreasonable maybe needs a better definition. This is a compromise from my point of view, which is good for us to start thinking about how we deal with roadworks and the works on our street. I still would like to go further, so that from my point of view this won't be the end. I'm still going to research some of these like rental systems that they're using around the other parts of the world to actually say, what is a road corridor or a public use corridor? Do you pay a rental that's then put into the tender processes and you know, just money go around, but it incentivises people to get these things done fast and decentivises them to do them slowly. So it's not the end for me, but there's more work to do for me behind the scenes and whatnot. But this doesn't necessarily also, this doesn't also take into consideration the other people, the other parties who are doing work on our roads at the moment. And the two big ones in Christchurch that have caused probably the most disruption, and it's probably going to create a recovery on top of a recovery, is Durham Street and Manchester Street. They are revolting. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been a revolt. I'm surprised there hasn't been a revolt on the time it's taken to do those two roads. Like driving down Manchester Street, I look at the plan, I've got plans, I mean I'm in a privileged position, I can look at the plan and try and work it out, but for every, you know, many people, you drive down there, you just have no idea what's going on, and it's taken so long. It's been a year and a half that damn road's been closed, I mean to two-way traffic. This doesn't go as far to address that issue, and that's where I think the sort of, if we looked at a rental system in the future that would actually address those kind of that problem. But that organisation needs to go on notice to get that work done, because it is starting to upset our city. The Hereford Street car park that we will talk about later has 52 people on the weekend going and using it because people can't get to it. It's just not on. And that's what they've been saying, the people who own the Hereford Street car park, because of all the roadworks and stuff around there, they just don't know how to get to these places. And for having it there for a year and a half is just not on, and it can't happen in our city ever again. But so this goes a wee way to starting doing that from our own perspective. So it's good to sort of get our own camp in a good place, but we need to take responsibility for the other users that are using the roadways and actually doing this disruption. But I'll support this.
Thank you. Yanni?
Yeah, I agree with the comments that have been made. I think we really do need to look at how we can improve. And I know, you know, that maybe it's a communication thing, because, I mean, there's another article about Riccarton Road and people just don't get a sense of contractors working when maybe there's reasons because of the weather or the resources have been diverted to Kokura or whatever it is. There is a frustration, like Councillor East and Councillor Swiggs have raised, is that people see a whole bunch of stuff blocked off and then very little activity, and it's been something that, you know, I think if we can improve it through the communication about why things aren't happening if they're not, or if things aren't happening and we're monitoring it more to make sure that more things do happen, then that will be hopefully a better outcome. I too continue. I'll work with Councillor Swiggs over too, because I do think we at some stage need to consider where businesses are being unreasonably affected by delays to roadworks, that there should be some mechanism for, in cases of hardship, that they can actually apply for some relief. And certainly some of the stories that I've seen post-earthquake, it wasn't the earthquake that did the damage, but it was the roadworks that put some businesses to huge financial pressure because of the length of time taken just to do what appeared to be pretty straightforward and simple things. So, but I think it's a good start, and I'll support it.
Jamie and Raph.
Cheers, I'll be quick with this, but I just wanted to say that, very seldom does chucking money blindly at something ever solve it, and I think that the recommendations in 3 are really what is going to make the difference, and it's about communication and collaboration, and they're not just buzzwords, but they're answers to a genuine question. And whilst we share these frustrations, the answer is not robbing Peter to pay Peter, because these businesses are ratepayers. So whilst taking money, from the same person and giving it to them again, I think is a nonsense. I think the other issue around this is definition. And if we wanted to go down a track of, like I said, the robbing Peter to pay Peter road, then you'd essentially be trying to define what is affected by the earthquake. Is there anyone that hasn't been affected by the earthquake? And I would argue that there wouldn't be a person in Christchurch that hasn't been adversely impacted as a result of the quakes. So I think there is an answer to this, and it's about doing things smarter and doing things in partnership with the community. But I think we've got a pragmatic set of recommendations there, and I think it's a better way to go, because the blindly chucking money at things is just would be a very dangerous precedent, and I don't think it would solve anything.
Raph?
Yeah. I think the key here, and the feedback I've had from businesses, especially around Durham Street, is communication. So we can't rely on just popping information into a letterbox. We have to make sure that we speak to everybody who is potentially affected. That's really important. And secondly, in terms of the penalty aspect, there is room to consider, maybe as Dion and Yanni have mentioned, that when we let contracts around works, that when we look at things like penalty clauses, this could be part of a penalty clause. So there's an agreement, this is how long the project's going to take. The businesses that are affected understand how long it's going to take and are okay with that. But if it goes beyond that, there needs to be some kind of penalty. So we have penalties for contracts overrunning, and perhaps compensation could be part of the penalty clauses around contracts. So that's something that I think is worth looking at.
Yeah. Tim.
The feedback, and Ref's absolutely right, and so is Jamie, you can't throw money at something and solve it, because I think there are some issues with some of our streets with regards to finding surprises when you lift up the road, and some of our streets are like old houses. When you kind of buy an old house and you do it up, you never pull down a wall and say, oh, surprise, it's better than I thought. It just doesn't happen. So, but I will mention a staff member in my area and some others. Ross Herritt was absolutely outstanding, and I've had fantastic feedback, because it does come down to communication. And the key to the communication is when things have gone wrong, or when things have been discovered that weren't there, like tram tracks. You would think that we would know where all the old tram tracks are, but surprise, we don't. That communication, and I have to say that the staff member, Ross Herritt, has been absolutely outstanding in that area. So I think if we can find a mentor or someone that can guide that, which we have at our hands, that would be the way to go forward. Penalties can only work when there has been a delay that should not have been. To put unfair timelines on something, then there's been a surprise, it just doesn't work. So, thank you.
Vicky.
I wonder if we could just, as a very simple mechanism, do the communication. Do you recall we looked at changing the tone of our communication so that we weren't bossy, and we were actually telling people why we were doing something? So, for example, Rickerton Road, which has been dug up for, I don't know which year we started. 1872. Well, it feels like a very long time, has very long potential areas that we could put a sign that says we're digging up the road because the water pipes underneath are 98 years old and really in danger of collapsing, and we really want you to have a really good water supply and wastewater and sewage. But we haven't told people that along the way, so a lot of people just get frustrated. And I wonder just where we are actually in front of people's businesses, houses, particularly on very busy roads, if we could just tell them for a start why we're doing it, because there are very good reasons why we're doing it, but we tend to keep them slightly secret. And I wonder if we just couldn't get, I'm sure some people have got some old election posters. Oh, you've got some current ones. There'll be a lot more around after the 23rd. Rev's got all the solutions.
Yeah. Look, I just want to kind of wrap up the debate. Oh, Mike.
Sorry. Look, I guess after so many years, we're all now suffering a lot of rebuild fatigue. And it's very clear, obviously, that although we're running the city, there's obviously other agencies involved, and Takaro is obviously leading the repair of Manchester Street and Cambridge Terrace, which has actually caused a lot of that frustration within Christchurch. And I think everyone probably around this council chamber has been absolutely frustrated of what we've been through and what the city's been through. But in terms of some of the actual projects that we've been delivering, especially around my ward with the cycleway, the council staff have gone to great efforts to actually work with the businesses affected. And I know everyone is not happy, but they did do a lot of work and they tried to provide parking wherever possible. And I think really we, the people of Christchurch, just need to have a look at these businesses that are being affected, and perhaps if you need to park 20 metres away from it to go to it, still park there and walk. You know, I think this is a problem we've got to in society where we just become lazy, and if we can't park outside a business, we just won't go to it. Well, these businesses need our support. So therefore, if you've used them in the past, keep using them. Just park and walk to the business.
Yeah, well, I'll wrap up the debate now. And I just wanted to say that, I mean, it was interesting when this came to finance and performance, it wasn't a unanimous vote. But what we did around the table was, I think, work with staff to come up with some recommendations that we could bring to council. It became very clear during the discussion that the solution to the big problem is in procurement policy, and that's still coming back to council. And within that, I mean, Dion has raised the issue of the rental mechanism, which is how it's done in the UK and some big projects, and you know, I think that all of these options are worthy to explore in that context. So it's kind of like this really focuses on the communication, but also lifts the ongoing question of disruption in the public realm into a governance monitoring role in a much clearer way than it was before. So it's been a really good outcome that this was brought to the table, that we've kind of worked through the issues, and today I think we can agree to a pathway forward, and it will take our city forward. So thanks to those that originally raised it. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Right. How are we going? 11:17, cooking on gas. That was dangerous to say that.
Number 10.
The next item is item number 10. And that's... Were you chairing that meeting too?
Yeah, these all came from the same meeting. So this is simply the corporate finance report for the period ending 30th of June 2017. The only thing to note, really, the ongoing Treasury policy breach regarding the repricing of interest is noted at paragraph 4.5 in the report has been historic, and that's previously been approved by the committee, ratified by council. It's just an ongoing situation. And the reasons for this are noted in the report as well. So the committee remains comfortable with this advice, and I'm certainly happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you. Dion, are you seconding it?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Yeah, and a question. Thank you.
Yeah, my question, I'm sorry I didn't ask it at the meeting, but it's just something that's sort of been popping into my mind a little bit recently around the market, and our overdue debtors are increasing. if you look at page 127 of our agenda. Is this a trend that you're seeing pop up at the moment?
For a sec, overdue debtors are Patricia's realm.
Okay. Am I on the right report? Yeah, I am on the right report. Oh, gosh.
We would normally see a similar trend. So the graphs in that report actually show a couple of years' trend in overdue debtors.
Yeah.
And we typically do get a bit of a peak around June. But you got to remember, these are trade debtors. They tend to not be individuals, except for libraries. And so the bulk of them are, our normal business debtors. And actually, if you look at the graph on page 127, we're actually lower than where we have been.
Because they're not increasing.
So they're not increasing from when we've had some big peaks back in April 16. I've got the right page number. I'm just looking at my PDF version.
I was just looking at the last financial year is all.
And we're actually down from the position we were in June 16 on overdue debt.
Okay. So there's nothing untoward?
Nothing totally unusual.
Let's go.
All right, is there any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Next item on the agenda are the final statements of intent. Again, Andrew.
Again, this is just noting the receipts of the final statements of intent for the organisations that are noted in the resolution. Some changes were made in response to Council's comments and CCHL's comments. These are noted at paragraph 4.8 in the report and in attachment A. The staff recommendation was approved by the committee unchanged. Again, I'm happy to move this today.
Do I have a seconder? Jimmy Chen. Any questions? Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Development Christchurch. Is that right? Next one. Progress report. And we have Rob Hall here, so rather than take a comment from the chair of the committee, I'll just hand over to Rob. Do you want to just make an overarching statement? And
yeah, I'll keep it pretty short.
Yep.
So this is just the public section of our report, which is largely focused on the works in New Brighton. Just by way of update, the work on the playground park area is progressing really well. All equipment is purchased, our contractors on site. Initial significant groundworks will be undertaken next week to get holding tanks put in for water storage. And we remain on track for a substantial part of the facility being open for this coming summer. A lot of work going on behind the scenes around the commercial core, which is progressing well.
Very good. Are there any questions? Yanni? Phil?
Thank you for the work you're doing. Just in regards to the community involvement, I think this is kind of a request that we asked previously with the playground. Have you been able to, can you elaborate on any sort of initiatives to get children or local community involved in the construction or the...
Yep, so we had, so we're not going down the route of having children or community involved in the construction of the park. We did involve heavily in terms of feedback for the final design. But we are, the team do have an ongoing engagement with a couple of the local schools.
Any opportunity to have some community, particularly with the children, involvement in things like, I don't know, like in some parks we've put in murals, we've put in tiles, the schools have, have contributed. Is there any?
Yeah, it's going to be a bit challenging first up because it's going to be heavy groundworks, big 10-ton diggers putting in some pretty big holes, then construction building works for the main part of the ship in the middle of the playground, and then fitting of equipment. So there may be something around potentially around murals. We can have a look at it. There's certainly we have had community groups offer to donate park benches to the area as well.
And just finally, is there any street art provision being looked at?
Has
there been any provision for street art considered?
No, not at this stage, no.
I'd certainly encourage that. I mean, I've been to so many developments where the school kids from the local area have, like they've done little handprints or they've done tiles, and the tiles together make up the mural, and it's not an expensive option, but it's a really engaged option, and the kids and their parents are always so proud of seeing their either their artwork or their palm print as part of the permanent design of the, I mean, when the pier was being fundraised for, you'll notice all of the paving stones leading up to the building itself. They've got people's names, businesses' names, people that contributed to the pier. They literally bought a brick in the ground, and so they're a permanent reminder of having contributed to their community. So if there is something that can be done in that space, it doesn't cost anything, but it produces way more than the financial value.
No, look, thank you for that. I've noted it. We'll feed it back to the team.
Phil?
Well, thanks for your report. I just wondered, like, under New Brighton and the Imagination Station, and 700 people in 2 weeks seems a really good number, and nearly 80% of those, when you interviewed them, they said they would continue to shop in New Brighton. And I'm just wondering, was there any other evidence that in fact they might have followed through on that, and in fact there has been sort of like a regenerating or developmental effect of the people coming for the Imagination Station and then shopping more widely?
Yeah, the feedback we've had from other shop owners in Carnaby Lane, Bear Lion and the other shops there, and Paper Plus opposite, has been an upturn in business. So we're looking at working with Imagination Station, how to extend their time there. And you would have noticed through the other work that we've done around just upgrades to Carnaby Lane in partnership with the local shop owners, a whole lot of planting boxes and new amenity have gone in this week, which looks great, really good.
Great. Thanks, Ron.
Glenn?
Thank you. Actually, are you able to say about with the multiple owners and the car parks out the back, whether you've had any progress on that, or is that on the list?
Maybe we could pick up on that in the PX session.
Sorry. Just wondered whether that part...
Very good. Phil, can you... oh, sorry. I looked at Andrew and said, Phil, would you like to move the receipt of the report? Seconded by David East. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thanks very much. Next item, Memorandum of Understanding, Council, Christchurch NZ and Christchurch City Holdings. That also went to...
That also came from that same Finance and Performance Committee meeting. So this is the MOU between Christchurch NZ, CCHL and the Council. The MOU reflects the way that Christchurch NZ will report into the Council through the Finance and Performance Committee, including that committee receiving the draft statements of intent and running the letter of expectation statement of intent process. But it also includes a regular quarterly briefing to CCHL so that there can be a joined up approach to what you might think as more strategic matters across the two organisations, so that it is linked up there. Also important to note that this MOU has also been approved by the boards of CCHL and Christchurch NZ. So this is the final step in approving it by Council today.
So,
and as a board member of both of
yeah.
the organisations, I probably shouldn't.
Oh, well, yeah, no, well, I won't either. Ref will move it, and it will be seconded by someone who's not on either the boards, David East. Is there any discussion? I'll put them...
Only one question.
Sure.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure, because there's a three company, the Christchurch, New Zealand.
NZ.
NZ, Christchurch, NZ, yes, and the City Council and also CCHL. But in here we separate the Christchurch NZ for two different entity.
Yes, there's a
one
hold-
is a limited, one is
Yes.
holding limited.
Yeah, there's a
Why
there's a holdings company.
Yes.
We've always had a separate holdings company, and
But actually, it's one entity. Why we just separate two sign signature? Yeah.
they're separate companies.
There's two companies, Councillor Chen.
Yeah.
There's
Yes,
two companies. Christchurch NZ Holdings Limited was formerly known as Transition Holdings Limited, and about this time last year, CDC Holdings Limited. So that is still actually a holdings company, and then we have Christchurch NZ, which is the new entity.
Thank you.
Yep. Right, I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Audit and risk, audit proposal letter. It also, oh no, that went through audit and risk, so you're happy to move it, and seconded by Andrew. Any discussion? I'm going to sign the document. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And how's that for efficiency? I've just signed it. Right. Thank you. Audit and Risk Management Committee minutes. I'll move that. Seconded by Raf. Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Normally we do the minutes at the beginning. Report from Innovation and Sustainability Development Committee, and I'll hand over to the Chair, Vicky Buck.
So we had a really interesting meeting with the committee room absolutely jam-packed full of people coming to listen to the supermarkets on waste minimisation and not using plastic bags as single-use plastic bags. Interestingly, neither Foodstuffs nor Progressive opposed a levy on plastic bags. They just wanted it to be uniformly applied throughout the country, so it was a national levy. Really interesting to hear what they were doing by way of sustainability. Foodstuffs particularly were doing some quite neat things. Electric delivery vehicles, for example, electric charging stations outside at least one supermarket, and more coming. New Zealand had the first non-polystyrene meat tray so that it could be recycled. And they were doing a lot in the waste minimisation field. They've asked us to look at, within our procurement policy, and ensuring that recycled plastic is included, so that there is a market for what they're doing. And there was, and then EcoCentral outlined what they were doing. And their particular area that they'd like to get into is lithium batteries, which obviously becomes much more of an issue. Action Bicycle Club presented, and they had been looking at trialling, people being allowed to trial electric vehicles, electric bikes for a couple of weeks, which enabled them to try them before they bought them. You'll see there the small DCs rebate is suggested to continue. We went through the master plan, prioritised what we felt should be there. The Innovation and Sustainability Fund comes to us on the 28th, and the next meeting looks at achieving a climate change target for the entire city, so that Christchurch becomes carbon neutral by a certain date, and exactly how we get there. So things like electric transportation modes, including buses and trucks and things, as well as cars, will come to the next meeting.
Yep. Fantastic. So you'd like to move that?
Yep.
And seconded by Sarah. Any discussion?
Only one question.
One question for whom?
We got into the committee, the recommendation, particular paragraph 4 here. There's a low priority. Why particular recommendation allocate additional $16.4 million in the next 10 years?
So we went through every item that was on the master plan list, and Carolyn's here, she knows them all off by heart, and went through the ones that we felt were high priority, medium priority and lower priority, and have suggested a range of the ones that should be in the long-term plan. That will come back to the long-term plan for discussion anyway. So you'll get the chance to say yes, no, or maybe to all of those anyway. But they needed something to put forward into the draft long-term plan, and so that's what they have. Those were the ones that we didn't think were the highest priority, that 16.4 million, and in some areas weren't being sought by the local community. So those are the ones that we haven't recommended.
Well, we're all lost. I can't find the page that you're talking about.
This is item 19 they're discussing.
Right. This is page 185.
Oh, I've done the whole thing.
Sorry? What?
I've done 16 to 20. Catch up.
We could do that. So that's the minutes. Can you add to the recommendation item number 20, which is that the council receives the minutes from the Innovation Sustainable Development Committee meeting held 23rd of August 2017. So just cut and paste, bring it up, and we'll deal with it now as one resolution. Sorry, you completely lost me. I was going, this doesn't have anything more than one recommendation, and it's not.
Yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't find the page. So
I just did all four, and in answer to Jimmy's question, yes, we went through all those.
No, that's good. But so you ain't heard the last of it yet. There's more to come in the LTP.
Yep.
So just for clarification, on my page 203 with the the Sustainability Fund establishment, that further information about the development of that would still come to council.
Yes, it comes to the council on the 28th
of this month.
Yes. Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
That's fine.
All right. Okay, so that's been moved and seconded. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That's carried. Next one, development contribution, small residential unit rebate, which the chair's passionate about. Would you like to?
No, I already did it.
report?
I covered everything right down to I'm now up to 21.
Okay, so item number 17. Do I have someone who will move that? Jamie, seconded by Glenn. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Development Contributions Policy Review 2017. Do I have a mover? Jamie, seconded. Vicky. Any discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That's carried. This is the mark of a good committee, you know, I have to say.
It is a good committee. It's a lot of fun.
Except for these items, but
we manage these.
Master Plan Capital Projects Priorities. Would someone like to move these?
Yep. This question.
Mike, seconded. Dion. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. We've done the minutes. Next item. Oh, did we do the 2 items of minutes? Oh, that was my mistake. I should have included them both. So, Vicky moves, seconded Dion. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Next item is the implementation plan tsunami report, and if Mary could come to the table. And I will just quickly introduce this. It seemed to me when I became Mayor that there wasn't a structure in place that automatically switched on in a post-event environment in order to conduct a review of what had occurred. And regardless of the success or perception of otherwise, it's really important that we do that after every single event. And we have had our fair share of events, but that we've had to review. And I actually believe that we're getting better at putting in place the mechanisms for reviewing events after they occur. And one of the things that we've done is to ensure that when the review is done, that we actually speak to a broad range of people that have had some involvement in managing or responding to the event, and then bringing together the recommendations about what we might do to improve in the future. But more importantly, to embed that into both action plans or into standard practice for the future. And I honestly believe that this is something that we have failed to do nationally in response to major events, and I'm thinking of the Canterbury earthquake sequence as the glaring example of where individual organisations have reviewed events from their perspective, but there still hasn't been the sort of synergistic, what's the right word? But the bringing together of all of those in order to develop a lessons learned that then gets built into the national framework and into the local frameworks throughout the country. So there are some incredibly positive things that we learnt from the Canterbury earthquake sequence, and we've seen some of them implemented in Kaikoura. So obviously the fund that was made available to businesses so that they could continue to pay staff at a time when there was a high degree of uncertainty. You know, that's like gold. After the Canterbury earthquakes, the government also set up a fund which enabled exporters to go overseas and actually reassure quite troubled and worried markets. And that degree of reassurance that some of our exporters could give directly by fronting up and talking through the challenges that they were facing, but also the advantages that they could bring to the supply chain, and with just-in-time supply chains, it was hugely challenging for a lot of exporters. It was gold. It was a magic thing for the government to do. But there are other things that were done that I would regard as not best practice and something that do need to be investigated. And, I guess that in an election year, it's not a good year to be looking at what you got wrong. And so, as soon as this is out of the way, it's something that I think we really do need to focus on, because you learn, I personally think, more from your mistakes than you do from your successes. And you really don't want to see them repeated elsewhere. I look at what happened in Wellington with this particular earthquake that sparked off this review, and I remember reading in the paper a headline that said that the most earthquake-prone street had dodged a bullet, and I really fear that there is a belief that if you dodge a bullet, you're bulletproof, and you're not. So I can see some of the concerns that were evident after the September earthquake leading to some of the, or contributing to some of the events after the February earthquake. We really do need to learn those lessons and make sure that they're embedded not just in Christchurch but across the nation. So I'm really appreciative of this report. I'm very happy to move it, and Phil will second it, and now I'll hand over to Mary to speak to the report generally.
Thank you very much. I've also got Sonali here, who's from our community development, our civil defence and emergency management team, and who's been holding the pen on the implementation plan. Just to pick up on what the Mayor said, is that we do now have a very structured and formal process about reviewing events. So after every event within 3 months, we are aiming to do a review and a corrective action report, and make sure that what we learn from that is implemented and flowed on to future events and also the activities in between. For our larger events such as this, we, as you know, we did a full external review and developed this implementation plan, so that we can ensure that we build community preparedness and resilience before events, but also learn from what's happened in other events for our response. You will have seen, hopefully, the lessons that were learnt from this event and the fire event by what we did on the flooding event, which was in many respects totally different in terms of how we really improved that communication both to affected parties and people, and more generally the way the EOC was managed and operated, and also how we actually had people out on the ground at all times, particularly in those first few days, so residents had somebody to see and connect with, and also how we ensured our contractors, response teams and everybody that interacted had the same messages to give to people. So those were things that have hopefully improved since then. But today we're actually talking about this implementation plan. We had a message that you wanted a structure from your pre-brief this morning. You wanted a structural diagram. We weren't 100% sure what you meant by that, but we'll put that up on the board, which just outlines walking through from that we had the event. We then undertook a review, which was a review that was done externally of the CDM team, and then the CDM team have worked with others to develop this implementation plan. And it's probably appropriate that I hand over to Sonali, who's actually done all the hard work on this, to walk through the key elements and things that are happening from that implementation plan.
Thank you and good morning. So if I was to take you through from the left side, which is the sirens, what we're really looking to do here is review how we're going to use sirens in an event and combine it with the key public messages and resources that we have. So for example, how we can use the sirens in relation to the evacuation zones, but also look at other communication ways. So looking at voice capability for sirens is particularly an option, and we're going through the process of reviewing that and what's the best option for the communities that's there. Building on that is the evacuation plan. Three-pronged that is looking at how we can update the technical side on tsunami evacuation zones, but also the maps and the modelling that has gone into it. So it's a really good time to review those technical details and align it with our national standards, but also relaying that to the community side, how we can work with communities to get the best information out in the way that they see fit, and how we can work with the communities to get the messages out in their neck of the woods. And one of the things that we're working at the moment is looking at specifically tsunami evacuation planning. So working with communities and community boards and our community development advisors to prepare the community on some of the specific actions that we can take to help and enable the community to look after themselves better. And building on that is a community response resilience plans that encompasses other hazards as well as tsunamis. Which builds on to our operational side, which is the Emergency Operations Centre. As Mary said before, following the July event, we've incorporated a lot of the recommendations that has come out from our operations point of view. For example, having the staff training, having people on the ground, consistent public messaging, so everyone got the same message, and then that is reflected in our changing policy. And civil defence centres, so we're looking at taking a stock take of what we need in the civil defence centres, identifying what are the other buildings and services that we can use as civil defence centres, and encompassing that with volunteer training. So who are the volunteers that can be at the civil defence training, and how we can upskill them and give them that opportunity. And lastly, it's the communication, which is about registration. So if you've got evacuees, how we can register them as we've done in the July floods, and give them that opportunity. And also the public messages, it just keeps coming back to it, how we can get communication methods out in more than one ways, so the public feels informed, they're getting the up-to-date information, and they are feeling reassured. And we've also aligned this with McDem national messaging, so everything feeds upwards and they're all streamlined with us.
So we haven't gone through, if that's okay, point by, because the implementation plan's quite long, so hopefully you've had a chance to look at it, and we'll be implementing those and reporting back on, giving a sort of update about the implementation.
Which we've asked for, the committee asked for that to be earlier, rather than waiting till next year, which some of these have, you know, June 2018 for delivery, but I thought we'd requested a report back on progress. Oh yeah, no, sorry. I was looking at ours. We recommended a report back on progress by the end of 2017, and we've requested a further report on tsunami siren options and include information on tsunami risks, because I mean I still think that was you know, that's an area where we need to get right. I mean, if we're going to have tsunami sirens, then they got to be voice command, because if you don't tell people why they're hearing a siren, then it can be meaningless. You can educate as much as you like, but if people are in a state of panic, and we have to get people to rely on the long, strong, get gone, so people don't have to wait. But what we don't want is 20,000 people jumping in a car at the same time. So the local evacuation plans have to be local, and they have to be owned by the community and well understood. And that means that where people have to go to has to be well understood as well. And that's my inevitable frustration with McDem, who says long, strong, get gone as far as you possibly can. Oh, well, I'm sorry, but I think we've got to change the message to as far as necessary, and people need to understand what that means in each locality, because they will mean different things if you're up a hill, they'll mean different things if you're you know, outside the area of risk. And I think there needs to be much better understanding about what the risks are in terms of local, regional and nationally generated, you know, the other side of the world generated tsunami, what the risks are and what the time frames are in terms of response, because you know, I guess that, I mean, nobody wants to leave the shelter of their home and then sit on the bridge that is much more exposed than their house ever was, because they're stuck in traffic, and the neighbour who has no way of hearing the tsunami siren because they're, you know, sort of partially deaf, and has no idea that this is going on, and nobody's knocked on a door or rung her doorbell, flashed her lights or whatever to get her out of bed. You know, it's just, you know, so there's so much that needs to be done at the local level to make this meaningful. And the other thing is that we've focused here on civil defence centres, but there are some areas that won't have civil defence centres because they've got something that's way better and way more community embedded, you know, like the Littleton project and places like that. So they can, you know, civil defence centres or appropriate local facilities or things. So, David, you've got your hand up. Phil Yarney.
Thank you. Look, I endorse everything that the Mayor has just said, and one of the big issues, and I live in that sort of tsunami affected area, was a lot of people, as you say, got in their cars and disappeared to Darfield or further, and so in the evolving development of this plan, I think I have seen some preliminary mapping, but it would be very helpful to say if you live in this area here, it is advisable, you know, the long, strong, get gone. You need to move beyond or into this area here.
Or go to Maidaho High School, or go to Linwood, or go to,
the sheer geography of our coastline and the limited access, egress points, it would have been quicker to walk out.
Some people should have.
Than it was to sit in it.
Some people should have.
Should have, yeah. And it just created endless traffic jams, and a lot of people that probably didn't need to move did, and created all sorts of pandemonium for the rest. The other area, I think, is actually the use of the sirens themselves, and I do support Leanne's analysis there too, that they were put in primarily for the long distance earthquake event, and really when they were turned on in this event, if we had a tsunami from Kaikoura, it would have been and gone by the time the sirens were even turned on. So we need to look at that sort of methodology, as well as looking at the the local event as opposed to the long-term event, and when we use the sirens. And thirdly, at a local level, we had an annual meeting for one of the residents group, the North Shore Residents Group, recently, within the last couple of months, and there was a presentation given by a staff member from ECAN. Name escapes me at the moment, but it was probably the best tsunami presentation that I have seen, which clearly sort of gave people that close event scenario right through to the Chilean scenario, and I think I'd like to find out what her name was, but it was certainly a presentation that needs to be wider delivered, and the understandings of that delivery, I'd say, would go a long way to reinforcing what you are trying to develop here. So I'd like to commend what you've done so far, but you know, there are some areas I think that we could really firm up and make this a good example of how we would react in terms of tsunamis of varying location origin. So yeah, great work so far, and I'd just like to see some of those other things incorporated.
So thank you for that. And just in response, the evacuation planning is going to include the when, where to go to and how to get there, and working in with the police about transport planning to how best to effectively move people out. The siren report will come back on those issues you raised about the sirens and the pros and cons of using them for different events. And the team is working quite closely with Marion from ECAN, and sometimes doing joint where she presents stuff and we work. So we agree with you. Excellent presentation. Yeah, it's great. Yep.
Well, it might be a good idea to get that presentation in front of the council in a live streaming session, but also to actually do a video of it and get it online, because those sorts of presentations are like gold, and if people can just, you know, watch it when it suits them and absorb it. But I mean, keep using it for public meetings. It's great. It's great for communities. Phil Benyani.
Thanks for all this, Mary. And David has referred to, you know, like a community meeting where people are really involved with some good information. And I just really want to ask you, and the whole theme of working with communities, so in terms of the preparedness plans, and just how we get there in terms of, and I guess it's, and there's clear reference to involvement of community boards, and I'm just presuming though, and there is the potential here for a whole community development project, so that in fact this whole area of preparedness is really targeted by us as a council. So in fact, yeah, I guess we have all of our community engagement and community development people on board with our communities regarding this.
So there are only 3 people in the community resilience team and civil defence, but they are working quite closely and have actually met with the community development advisors and community governance advisors, so that actually it can be a joint team response that can work on this, but also in different areas there'll be different issues. So a holistic response to the community. Do you want to add?
Yes, and building on that is really working with the other community groups as well. So everybody coming to the table and understanding what that risk is, and using the resources that we already have in a community to look after ourselves, and getting that shared perspective, I think is really important. So we are definitely planning to bring other community groups, community boards, as well as community development advisors.
So in that way, there'll be support for development of those community
sorry, Yanni.
Cool. Thank you. Just wondered where the funding's coming from to do this, and if there's any funding available for those community groups to be involved in developing community resilience plans.
So there's, as I said, some resources within the community development team in terms of there's community resilience workers there to work with communities, and some of the community development advisors will also be doing that. But there are also resources available that will support some of the initiatives that have come out from local communities with their community resilience plans, and we're looking at other ways to get more resources for that. So as a community, and we know having Aranui have already done one, and Belfast already doing one, and other communities doing some, they often come up with initiatives that they want to run themselves, and resources such as booklets or posters. So there's some limited resources for that, and we're looking at other ways that we can get more resourcing.
The community resilience fund, is that something, like there's a problem for Apple, is we've got a huge area affected, and we're having to fund community resilience projects because there's no central funding for it, but it seems
I think this started before this project, so are you able to give some relief to the community boards that are funding some of these resilience plans?
Yes, we'll discuss with your community governance managers about what community resilience projects you're having brought into the community boards, and look at whether we can pull those together into one package or one stream of funding into the community resilience area. So we'll talk to your teams and find out what's coming in and how we can pull those together. But we weren't aware that you were being asked at a community board level for funding for community resilience plans. So we'll follow up.
You might get some money back for your community board, so stop digging.
Yeah, so we'll do some work and develop a response for that.
You know the Mount Pleasant project? I think they've met with you on a number of occasions.
My understanding was that they were getting funding from Red Cross. That's the advice I got just a couple of days ago, so they weren't asking council for money.
And I think you'll find that there was a resolution from the funding report into them to see if there was money attached to the tsunami response funding for that thing. So you'll look at it. That's great.
We'll follow up on that. Yeah.
I guess there's some communities that are very well organised, and there's areas that are at risk that don't have the same community infrastructure in terms of residents groups or some of the they're in a different, they've got different strengths. So what I don't see in here is a kind of plan to target those areas that haven't been as well organised or connected. Is there anything that you're considering around the areas that may be more vulnerable because they don't have active residents groups or neighbourhood support or?
So this report is purely the implementation of the recommendations from the review. So that wasn't identified in the review as an action, so this hasn't addressed it. But broader and outside of this implementation review is the team is looking at areas, and also that's something that our community development staff are looking at, and it's also something the community response fund is looking at, about actually developing and supporting those local communities to activate the communities and connect them so they can respond and do things such as community resilience plans and other responses.
And this is the final question. I think you mentioned it, but I couldn't find it in the report. But are we doing, I drove past a school the other day that had an old sign that said, faded yellow CD sector post. Are we doing any work around the whole, where are the civil defence sector posts, where are the kind of community information hubs? Because I know we had a project, and I thought in terms of lessons learned post-earthquake, there was a collaborative group of information community groups that gave us a lot of feedback about what worked well and what could be improved. But I didn't see any discrete action around reviewing those sectors, or posts, or those. Like the other one, I'd say it's the welfare centre. But
this isn't arising. Your question doesn't arise from the tsunami event
well, it does,
report.
It's where people went in the tsunami.
No, because it doesn't arise from that, because at that stage, when we asked people to evacuate, we hadn't called a state of civil emergency. So it's not, it doesn't come to play. There's a whole lot of combined issues here, but it's a lesson learned from the Canterbury earthquake sequence, which is that the sector post sign outside the school hall means nothing.
Yeah.
So, and it might be actually a good idea to just take them down unless they are genuinely civil defence sector posts. But can you respond to that?
So we are, let's Nani, because we are doing a stock take of that.
And the welfare centre was fed into the review, this review.
Yeah, sure, if I may. So we're doing two things. So looking at taking down the sector post signs, because under the new review it is no longer, so it's all been disestablished. In place of that is the community hubs and the civil defence centres. And we're doing two things there, identifying what are the other civil defence centres that we could potentially use, but also looking at community hubs where communities can actually naturally gather for that cup of tea, to be with other people and working with those communities to find those facilities.
But also connect back to whatever the coordination function is, because I think the real gap in both September and February was that there was no way that the community could connect unless they were a sort of a recognised civil defence group within the structure set out by legislation rather than set up by the community. Yeah. Good. All right, well, it's been moved and seconded. Is that right? Yes, it has. Mayor and Councillor Clearwater. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. And thank you both very, very much. It's much appreciated. It's big steps forward. The next item on the agenda, amendments to RMA delegations and new RMA fees, but this has come straight to Council, but I'm still going to invite the Chair of the Regulatory Performance Committee to introduce it.
Thank you. This has arisen out of some minor changes to the Resource Management Act, and John Higgins briefly brought me up to speed with that yesterday. It just centres around a couple of changes. One is permitted boundary applications, which essentially allows someone to build closer to a boundary provided they've got the adjoining neighbours' consent, and the other one is marginal or temporary non-compliances, which that one sort of went over my head a bit. John might have to elaborate there, but essentially this would normally have gone to the Regulatory Performance Committee, but because these measures come into force on the 18th of October, it's coming straight to Council. So essentially we are now seeking to amend the delegations authority to implement these two new aspects of the Resource Management Act and allow staff the delegated authority for recovery of fees which are set out in here associated with these applications. John may want to elaborate a little further, particularly perhaps on the marginal or temporary non-compliance side of it, but that's a brief overview of where we're tracking.
Thank you, David. John?
So I might let Vivian kick off. It's a bit of an overview.
Okay, so there's sort of two parts to the report, and I do apologise for it not going to a committee first, but we had a bit of a conflicting advice from the Ministry for the Environment about timeframes, but there's a bunch of changes that come into force on the 18th of October, and some of those involve the two sets of new fees, which is what David was referring to. So we do want to get the fees in place as soon as possible, as close to the 18th of October, and we do have to do a special consultative procedure because that's what the Act says. So that's the fees part of the report. The other part of the report relates to delegations, and that just picks up on the recent amendments to the Resource Management Act, which went through about 3 or 4 months ago. So we do need to change our delegations to reflect those legislative changes. And again, some of those will actually come into force today if you agree to the changes, and others will come into force on the 18th of October, and they're outlined in the attachment for you to see.
Any questions? Someone like to move it?
I'm happy to move the...
David, seconded by Sarah. Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you. Annual plan contribution to Christchurch Yacht Club. Item 25. This one's a report back to council, fulfilling a council resolution. So could I invite staff to present the report? Well, just to...
I'll give you a brief summary. It's, so at the time of the annual plan, some deliberations, there was discussion with regard to the contributions to supporting the rebuild of the platform for the Christchurch Yacht Club, which is on this coastal pathway. The transport budgets have contributions 327,000 going towards the transport elements, and the request was to support some underfunding that they at the yacht club had to the order of 239,000. So that was allowed for in the annual plan, and this report back is the options on how to action that, which is either to provide them with a grant with no conditions, or negotiate a grant with the condition of having enduring public access through that site down to the beach. That's it in a nutshell.
Very good. Sarah, would you like to move this? Yes, and who would like to second it? Yanni? Any questions? Any discussion? I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
See, that was a great presentation. Yeah, I know. It was fully debated there. Off-street free parking. Jamie's just left the room. What an idiot. All right. Jamie, would you like to introduce the off-street free parking paper?
So council obviously asked throughout the annual plan for staff to go and provide a report on limited free parking for people in the council off-street car parks in the central city. The development forum is essentially a JV committee with private sector and councillors. The paper's pretty straightforward, and there's been significant media interest, I guess, in it too, so I won't rehash that or debate its merits or anything like that in the introduction. There was robust consideration at the development forum, and the recommendation is for 1 hour free parking to be provided in the council off-street car parks for 4 months, coinciding with the opening of the new 800 space Litchfield car park building in October. So the development forum felt that the city needed help. They felt that it was a good opportunity for the public to experience the new roading layouts, help provide reasons to experience the central city again, and they thought it would help the central city become competitive with the free parking of the malls. So there's essentially 4 parts to this, and the development forum's recommending that all council off-street parks are converted to short stay, that 1 hour free parking is trialled and implemented, and that some wider work should occur around a possible extension, considering a targeted rate or parking validation systems. And finally, that a joined-up approach is undertaken between both the council and the central city businesses to promote this initiative and ensure that there's a consistent message. So there are some timing considerations, hence why this has come directly to council, just because we think it makes perfect sense for it to coincide with the opening of the Litchfield car park.
Very good. So would you like to move it?
Yes, I'm happy to move the committee recommendation.
And you'll second it? Are there any questions? Yanni?
Thank you for the report. Just looking at the table on page 5.6, particularly 105 Worcester Street and Aldersgate have quite high levels of occupancy already. And my understanding is those are private spaces that we've leased to provide car parking, so we're incurring the cost. And I just wondered if you considered if there was an option just to make it the art gallery and the Litchfield Street. rather than the ones that seem to be performing quite well and are bringing in some much needed revenue to pay for the cost of providing them in the first place?
Yeah, Rolleston Ave has a number of spaces that are leased out. There are 25 leased spaces at Rolleston Ave at $169 per month, but Worcester Street and Aldersgate don't have any leased car parking spaces. But they do have an all-day rate on them, so that's why the occupancy is quite high, because they're being used by commuters to park there all day.
So, sorry, I just don't understand why we would make those ones free for an hour if we've got good occupancy.
Because
No, it doesn't.
what we're trying to do is accommodate short stay and try and promote people to come into the central city and use short stay parking. So those spaces, like we could fill the whole city up with commuter parking if we made every one of our sites a cheap all-day rate. That doesn't encourage people to come into the central city to carry out activities during the day. All you're doing is filling them up with commuters.
I understand that, but from a financial point of view, this is quite expensive scheme. So you're basically displacing people into other car parks.
Temporary short stays, the percentage of that.
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that, I mean, are you sure that that converts all council managed paid off-street parking to short stay? Are you sure that's what you want to do? I mean, don't we have contracts?
Yeah. Well, we only have one site that has some leased car park spaces on
Worcester
it.
Street, isn't it?
Yeah, and no, that's Rolleston Ave.
Well, that's what I mean. Oh,
Yeah,
sorry.
They're only on a month. They're only on a month by month.
The corner.
Yeah. So they're only on a month by month lease. So
Right.
we can let those go with a month's notice. Ideally, what we want, and maybe I
Do we
think
want to do that, given that that whole site's going to be developed? I mean, why go to all that trouble to muck up people's arrangements? It's not going to make a huge contribution to the issue.
So what we want to try and do is to make sure that short stay parking in the central city gets priority. So ideally what we really want as a parking operations team is to keep the sites full but give short stay priority. And currently we've got 2 sites, and my original recommendation was to convert those 2 sites that are at very high occupancy to short stay, because we know from our parking occupancy surveys and using our parking dashboard where demand is for short stay, and we just need to have a little bit more short stay capacity in these locations. So,
But it's not going to last. I mean, that whole site's going to be closed for development at some point.
the one on Rolleston Ave.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true, but we don't know exactly when that will be.
What I don't understand, like, is there an issue with the lack of short-term parking in the central city? Because it doesn't, I can't see it from the report.
There are some locations in the central city where there's more pressure on short stay, and we have fairly accurate data that tells us which blocks in the central city have high occupancy for short stay, and we know that in some of those locations there are long stay or all-day commuter parking sites that could benefit the city by being converted to part or all short stay parking.
And does it take into account the new West End building that's opened?
Yes.
Right. And then can I just ask a second question, which was around the marketing campaign, and we've said that's approximately 100,000, and we've already got a central city transport campaign underway. We've given the CCBA a huge amount of money to do central city campaigns.
Yep.
How can we reduce the cost that's proposed in here around it? Have some certainty that it's not going to be that much.
Right, so I'll give you a bit.
Can we get Di up to the table on that one, because it's the marketing people, the comms people that have got the plan around that, but there's no way that it's going to be 100k. So.
Yeah, so I'll tell you the logic behind proposing a marketing campaign.
No, the discussions about the money. I mean, everyone agrees that we want to have a marketing campaign to get people buzzing back into the central city. So we're agreed on the outcome. we're not setting aside 100k to do it. That's the issue. Di.
Okay, yeah, I want to make it really clear that in no way will we be spending 100k on marketing parking in the central city. What we will do is we will have a campaign if this is passed, and we'll be doing it through very cost-effective means such as social media and using our existing networks. Just further to getting people back into the central city, we're working with partners such as Otakaru, ECAN, and also Regenerate Christchurch on an overall campaign for the central city. Again, no money has been approved or allocated for that. Christchurch NZ is involved, also Central City Business Association is very involved, but that's sort of looking at events for the central city, and it was something I think that when the business people have come and talked to us, they're very keen for this to happen, but again, no money has been allocated or committed to that.
Phil, did you have a follow-on question?
In the table, I'm not sure what page this is, on page 363, and in terms of the rates per hour, they seem relatively low. So I'm really just wondering how much of a current disincentive those rates are. That's my first question. And I'm also, though, wondering, can you tell us how those rates, say, compare with the central parts of other cities, like, for example, Auckland or Melbourne?
Yep, so yeah, we are about to review the rates in time for Litchfield Street building opening. They haven't been reviewed for a few years now, but I think what's relevant is what's happening in Christchurch, and it's really difficult to compare a market in another location and say that we should apply the same regime here. Can I just make a comment about the offer or the suggestion to have a marketing campaign? It wasn't a suggestion to have a marketing campaign. It was a central city marketing campaign, and the reason for that was to offset the effects of providing 1 hour free to council-only sites, because we're going to draw people out of private parking facilities. And
if they don't match our offer.
That's right, yeah. Yep.
So, yep. I mean, I'm assuming that the market may respond. Anyway, that's
okay.
Just sending a message.
Yeah.
That I think council was concerned about the quantum of money expended. We were very clear that it's not about telling people about parking, it was about telling people about what's going on in the central city. Vicky, Dion, Mike, Jimmy.
Mine's just a really simple question, probably for Dave. Do we have an opening date for the Litchfield Street car park?
Yes, and I'll pass that on to Aaron.
Okay.
27th of.
So I need to tell you that only this morning the project manager advised us that there's a risk to that date. So I have to go away and just see what that risk is, and we'll be pushing hard to make sure we meet the date that we said that we were going to open, which is it's now the 27th of October. It's possible.
No, the Litchfield car park. Okay, my question now. That's all right. The total cost to do this over, well, the total, I'll go monthly cost. The total monthly cost is $135,000 for Litchfield. Is that just the lost revenue, or is that, well, what I'm trying to say is, will this actually be cost neutral in effect because of the revenue that they're going to potentially generate from runovers? I mean, because it's unrealistic to expect people to stay there for 1 hour. They're going to stay for maybe an hour and a half or 2 hours or something. So there will be revenue coming in. Is there any idea about how much revenue may come in so that it actually offsets the cost that we're seeing here? Because, I mean, this cost isn't it is real, but it's for the Litchfield, it doesn't exist at the moment, so we're not actually even generating income there at the moment.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have any baseline at the moment because we haven't operated the building, so we don't know what people's behaviours will be and what might drive the use of the building. We have only been able to estimate it. So that's our best estimate that I've put in that report. Our revenue figures for the building, when we calculated revenue for the building, we've been slightly conservative. We expect that the revenue will be higher than what we've currently estimated, but we needed to make sure that we had, the right revenue equation against our costs for operating the building.
Have we got a cost per hour on that yet?
We've had initial conversations, but we haven't landed a cost yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is it safe to assume that potentially it would be cost neutral though, for the time that this is?
If we operate this as a 4-month trial, and the trial is not extended, then over the first 12 months we will cover our costs. If it extends beyond 4 months, then there's uncertainty around that. It's likely that we won't recover operating costs for the building in its first year. It's possible that by the second year, once occupancy is high, that we may start to recover costs, but it just depends. Yeah, we don't
and is this going to be for all spaces? Because is there any, for the Litchfield Street car park, is there any leases that you've got already established that could potentially offset the cost of this?
We have a tenant that's in the building as a small rental car company. They're taking 10 spaces that they're paying for, and we also have 30 of the Yugo fleet vehicles in our building, and they're on a lease arrangement.
So all of the other car parks will be short stay?
Well, what we want to do is keep the building full. So short stay will take priority, and then we'll offer a long stay parking offering that as the short stay demand goes up, we'll start to reduce that long stay.
And has there been any detailed analysis on the cost or what the balance would be to keep this cost neutral between having the 1 hour free for short stays, and then how many would we need to have as long stay or leased spaces?
Just coming back, I don't think you can call this cost neutral. It's costing us $135,000 a month to give this. You've got to appreciate that hour, everyone goes that first hour. So there's no way it's cost neutral. When you approve the report that approved Litchfield Car Park, we had in it, and admittedly for 550 car parks, not 800 as we've got, we needed a revenue to cover our cost of $3,200 per. Now this takes the first bite of everyone, and if you have a turnover of say 4 people per car park, and I think about when I go into town on the weekends, I'm there for usually over an hour, but very seldom over a couple of hours. By the time you wander around and shop, you're taking that first that's the kind of cost that will cost. So these costs are actual costs that it will cost to put this in. However, what we're trying to do is to encourage the rebuild of that, and if you look at the greater benefit for the bigger community in there, that's really where where this is.
With respect, Dave, I mean this is a paper cost. I mean it's a paper cost exercise, and I mean I'm just putting my finance hat. Really, it is a paper cost exercise. If we have the right amount of balance there, we can actually make that, could become cost neutral. It's not going to...
Yeah, but the paper here is dealing with a trial. So, and I think the advice that staff are giving is that they're really reasonably certain if it remains a trial, but not so certain in the first year of operation if it's not, because they don't have baseline data for Litchfield Street because it's not open yet. So, I mean, I think you've made a good point with your questioning, but I'd really like to move on.
One more question though. Is there any reason why we couldn't have this trial till the long-term plan, so that we can actually ask our communities how they want this to be funded potentially?
That's not a question for the staff, that's a question for debate. I mean, that's what we're here to decide, is whether we proceed with the trial. This was what was discussed at the Development Forum. The Development Forum has referred a recommendation to the council. It's not up to staff to answer what is the policy question we're being asked to decide.
Well, I would like to extend it out to the long-term plan.
Yes, so. That's fine, but we're not in debate, we're asking questions. So Mike and Jimmy.
Thank you. A lot of the feedback I actually get is actually around the fact that people are having to pay for minutes not used. So they're going over that half an hour, and they're getting charged for that next half hour when they're just there for another couple of minutes. Do we have the technology to actually install something so you pay for the minutes used, not for minutes not used? And could that be actually put into this Litchfield car parking building through an amendment to this resolution?
Yeah, so the technology that we have in the building exactly has that capability. If you parked at the airport, that's kind of how it works there, so you'll pay by the minute. In the future, if we implement an app, we can do that for all of our parking. So that the parking machines on the street have some limitations. There's, I think, the 10-minute increments that you can pay for. But, you know, a system where you pay as you leave has the capability to do that, so you're only paying for the time that you're there. An app has a stop-start function, so you pay for the time you've parked.
I'd just like to clarify one thing. When Aaron says if we, we'll probably, if we do it only for the first quarter of the year, we'll cover operating costs. Those operating costs are actual operating costs. Doesn't cover principal and interest on the money that you have put in there. So I just want to make clear that they are operating costs, actual operating costs, not total life costs.
So therefore, would we need to include something today to sort of make that happen? To actually start charging per minutes used, not for minutes not used? Because
you can't do this as part of this report. I mean, we would require a report on it, but we're getting a report on the fee setting for Litchfield, so we could actually deal with it in that context.
Okay, so can we note that it's part of the report to actually come back of how the it's charged?
We'll be able to bring you back a report on the technology used and the ability that we can do in different regimes if
But you'll be bringing that back anyway, won't you? Because you'll be bringing a paper for setting the fees at Litchfield.
We'll have to, yes.
Yeah.
I just want that part of it considered as well. As part of that.
Yeah, so can we just put somewhere, it could be right down the bottom, just so number 5, note that as part of the report back on fee setting for Litchfield car park, Litchfield Street car park, that it will include different consideration of calculating the charge. Does that kind of pick it up? Right. Okay. Jimmy?
Okay. Regarding to the paragraph 3 recommendation, how much the additional cost to convert all the management pay off-street parking to the short stay? If a 5, whether it's current 5 the off-street parking facility and 363 the parking places, all right? How much additional cost we convert?
The cost to convert will be reasonably short. We only have to notify and we can actually change the meters. They're all programmable. So the cost is reasonably insignificant to turn them from long-term to short-term. It's a few notices, we've got those signs around, so we haven't done a cost, but it's not actually a big cost.
Okay, thank you.
Glenn?
Yeah, just curious how this sits with our priority over encouraging active travel, and especially around cycling. So we're providing an incentive over getting your vehicle in over this time for nothing, but isn't that working against
it's another
our other programs?
So our objective is to convert people who are coming into the central city to spend the day in here to different modes of travel. We want people to still have a reasonably good choice around coming in to carry out daytime activities, coming in to shop, do business, etc., where they might be in, for the short stay, and that's why we want to give some priority to short stay.
I understand, parking provision for cycles, but a parking building, I guess, for many still connotes vehicle parking as opposed to cycles. So
yeah. Well, we've committed to an 805 car park building, so now we've just got to decide what the best way to use that building is, how we can optimise its use.
The focus is on short stay, not on long stay. Sarah?
So that I can make this an actual question, I'm going to say, is it right that part of the purpose of this is to get people away from the on-street parking that people have said that they rely on outside individual shops, and get that behaviour change so that if people do choose to drive their car, they look for an off-street option, and that leaves us more road space for things like cycle lanes and things like that.
That's a very good question. I'd say it's a very good. I have to say it was equally a very good point.
So the initiatives that we want to use support that.
Okay, now because the paper itself says a comprehensive marketing plan excluding television advertising is estimated to cost around 100k, I think that the councillors are looking for something that's a little bit more reassuring around number 2. So maybe we need the word cost effective, or the cost effective between A and joint. So it says a cost effective joint central city marketing campaign between private sector. Is that, because I don't want any comfort taken that we're authorising spending 100k, because we're not.
Totally. When I've got the marketing, when we've sorted out what we're going to do around comms marketing, I'm very happy to bring it back so you can actually see what we're doing.
Yeah, good. I think we've probably got the good people around the table who'd love to, contribute some ideas too.
Just clarity on that. Are you taking it out of existing budgets, or is there additional funding that you're seeking for that campaign?
There's no budget set for it at the moment, so I presume it will come out of, it'll come out of some budgets, but really it'll get offset by potentially revenue that we're getting in. So,
but isn't there a central city promotions budget that we've transferred to Christchurch NZ?
There is a central city promotions budget that has gone to Christchurch NZ, yeah.
Well, wouldn't we be calling upon them?
I just don't want to spend any additional money, given that we've just given the CCBA a huge grant for exactly this sort of marketing, and we've got Christchurch NZ who have got funds.
I can honestly reassure you that we will not be spending a heap of money on marketing on a parking this parking campaign. We are looking at working with other partners on bringing a bit more life back into the central city and getting people to come into the central city more. But again, no money's been committed. We're looking at ECAN around public transport and just some of these other partners as to what they're doing, so we can have a concerted effort instead of it being piecemeal between the partners. Yeah. But again, no money's been committed and no money allowed for. And Christchurch NZ is involved in those discussions.
Tim?
Because just to clarify that money to CCNZ, isn't that for promotion when there are international or major events? I'm just trying to clarify. So
no, we did have a city promotions budget, and that included events, but it's also around banners, Christmas decorations, all that sort of activity too.
The banners were around like the golden oldies and things, that's what I understood, rather than say a purpose.
Yeah. Although we did put up banners, for example, to promote the West End, and we have had other banners like that too.
But I mean, if you're going to come back to us, then maybe we have to resolve to, no, not yet, we're almost done. So if we could just turn da-da-da, and after the word council on number 2, just say and report back to council with details.
Really good.
When they're available. So we're not putting pressure on, but we're just we want to know what's
yeah.
Cool. All right. So that's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Oh. Right. Who moved it? You did. Do you want to start off the debate?
A lot of people want to talk.
So hang on. We're going to have to move. I'll move that the council resolve to spend standing order 4.2 relating to the meeting duration to enable the meeting to sit continuously for longer than 3 hours without a 10-minute break.
Yeah, that's
Do I have a seconder? Pauline. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Look, we're going straight into PX after this paper's done, so just reflect on that when you're debating. Right.
A few people are wanting to speak to that, so just in the interest of time, how about I reserve my right of reply?
Yeah, that's fine. Dion, and then who else was it? Yanni and Phil.
I would actually, I don't know how to even do this, but I actually want to sort of ask the council if we'll actually look at extending this out to the long-term plan, which is June 31st next year. The reason that I'd like to do that is actually it gives some certainty to people in the central city that the central city is still evolving, but there's a long time where people can actually come in without the barriers that they're starting to tell us. And you finished? Cool.
People are struggling with what you're trying to achieve when there isn't an amendment on the table to do that.
Yeah, well, I asked that before and you just sort of went on. I don't know how to do it.
But wouldn't you build that into a review in 3 months so that we might roll it over? Or
look, I mean, if you want to move that this be held over for consideration in the long-term plan, then that is an acceptable...
No, that's not what I said. I said I want this to be extended because what I'd like to do is actually... have it available now. Well, it's going to be open about November, let's think November. That's till March next year. There's a whole lot of stuff that opens at around March next year. Hoyts, there's more to the retail precinct that'll be open then.
So you want it to go through to the 31st of June?
Yes.
30th of June?
Yes. Yeah, but look, a review is just... I don't think that's given the city enough boldness that our central city needs to actually say, we're going to do this, we're committing to this to the long-term plan. However, we need to have a conversation about how we do fund this.
Yeah,
I think the long-term plan is the actual time where we do
because
look at
I was at the development forum, there was some discussions about different methods of funding this.
Yes, I know. I was there, remember.
Yeah, so the idea is that in the 4 months we can look at those different options of funding
this. Yes, but what I do not want to have is that we start looking at those things and they get implemented potentially in the long-term plan or whatever it is when we look at that. But between the period of March and June, it just sort of sits in limbo land. I don't want that to happen. I actually want there to be some continuation or continuity between now, or when it's going to happen, which will be November, right up until June when we actually really seriously look at this over that, probably that period where we do go to consultation. I don't want that to sit in limbo land and people sort of get mixed messages about what we're actually doing. We do need to have a conversation about how this is funded, but I want to make sure that our central city has some set in stone thing that this is what it's going to be, so that the people understand that. We get some good momentum in the central city.
I understand what you're trying to achieve. I'm trying to help here. I hadn't appreciated that you wanted to do this by way of an amendment to the actual resolution, rather than, I'm sorry, I've just missed what you're trying to achieve.
Cost implications of it.
We are debating an amendment that hasn't even been voted.
No. But what I'm trying to do is to find the appropriate wording of an amendment to help the debate.
I guess what he's saying is it's 8 months instead of 4 months.
Okay, so an amendment is that we change the 4 months to to the end of June 2018.
Can I?
That the review that remains reporting back by the beginning of April.
I wondered, to help Dion here, I've just realised he probably can't move an amendment because he's secondary substantive. He could be suggesting an addition. The only thing is, I get a sense, and I could be wrong, that this is looking like it could go through. You're wanting to add a bit more to it, and I don't ever want to run the risk of biting off more than you can chew and then losing it. So I don't know if maybe you, Leanne, could suggest a way that Dion could test what he's saying to see if there's an appetite for that.
Right, I'll move the extension to the 30th of June. But hang on, I may not get a seconder yet.
Why can't that be part of the review time?
I know that, but can you help me out here? I'm just trying to deal with this to the 30th of June, with the review taking place within 4 months from the opening of the Litchfield Street car parking building.
So
and I appreciate what Pauline's saying about the review, but what I'm
just going to say, I'm moving this as amendment. Do I have a seconder for this amendment? It's failed for the want of a seconder. So now we'll move to debate. And that is Dion. Okay, so the next speaker was Yanni, and Phil and Pauline.
I can't support this. I would have thought that we should actually be looking at the art gallery in Litchfield, and we've just heard that Litchfield may not be opening when it's scheduled. So I think we're going to get a report back on Litchfield charging anyway, so why not do it as part of that? We've asked for more information around the marketing campaign. There's been a request to look at extending it for a longer period of time. So I don't see why we should rush this today if we've got a few things that are still uncertain and we can get a better outcome. But the one thing I know is that we are paying money, leasing private land in the central city to provide public car parking that has got good occupancy that we're now going to be changing and giving an hour free parking on. And it, to me, I think this should apply to council-owned car parking buildings, but not the sites that we're privately owned and we're paying a huge amount of money leasing and then having even greater subsidy go in. There's sufficient off-street parking in the central city at the moment. It is a fair question, I think, around what is the cost of some of that. It's quite hard to decipher sometimes in some of those buildings. It's not just things like the cost per hour, it's the penalties that people pay if they overstay in some cases as well that have been quite hard on people. So I think we should be looking at what we can do to make it easier for people to come to the central city, but this is a huge amount of money with a lot of uncertainty, and there's a lot of other things that we could be doing in the meantime to make things simpler. And I would suggest getting the roadworks finished first would be the best thing we could do, like Manchester Street, Durham Street. That would be a lot more attractive for people to come into the central city than having to come in at the moment and putting up with just complete incomprehensible legibility of where to go, where to park, where to turn. So I think there's some merit in some of this, but it should be much more limited. Unfortunately, this council is not in a position to keep offering public subsidies to these sorts of things, and we have a limit with our finances, and I can't see why would we be extending such a huge financial subsidy to these off-street parks that are particularly not in our own council buildings.
Yep. Phil?
Look, I'm also opposed to these resolutions. I actually think it's unfortunate that Development Forum didn't consider the issue more widely, the issue around attracting and inviting people into our city before we started with subsidising the off-street car parks. And I think it's unfortunate we're not able to compare other sort of options or ways to achieve that, really, apart from the marketing part, which in terms of the report will be in addition to the current costs. It seems to me that a marketing campaign itself, leaving the car parking subsidy aside, may well have achieved similar objectives. But the Development Forum didn't ask for that, and I think that's unfortunate. So we've really got no comparison to make a decision on. And I think it would be useful still in the future to explore other options and ways we can really develop our inner city. So like, one example might be, in fact, I would support that we keep car parking charges down. So in fact, they don't inhibit people from coming in. It also, reference has been made for our cycling. This is going to be starting in October. In fact, our city is encouraging and supporting Bike October, but nothing like to the extent of this subsidy would do. We must support cycling as well. Will it be equivalent? I doubt it. And it concerns me a lot that in fact this 3 months is going to cost the ratepayer $600,000, and there's indications already that this be extended. If this is extended by popular demand to a year, we're talking about nearly $2 million of ratepayers' money. And with that in mind, I cannot support these recommendations.
Pauline?
All right, thank you. Originally, I was not supportive, but I really think that we do need to get people into our city, and we do need to actually facilitate a shift, a mental shift in that old attitude expectation that we have in Christchurch, that I can drive into town and park right outside the shop I want to go to, and the next one, and the next one. So people are really, I think, a little bit resistant to parking buildings. The ones I've been into, I've found them pretty much empty. I think this is a really good way to actually try and, galvanise that and get something happening there. But I would not support it probably for an extension. I think it's good for a temporary trial, and just for that very reason alone, to help people to discover the parking buildings, to discover where they are and how to use them, and then just get that change in expectation. What I am interested in too is this developing an app or something that people can readily find where the vacant spaces are, so they're not driving around. And of course the other thing with on-street parking is they're very hard to access at the moment with all the roadworks. So on a temporary basis I'll support this for today.
Thank you. Andrew?
Thank you. I think we need to get better at doing things rather than putting things off. Clearly, there are businesses which have established in the central city which would benefit from additional footfall. There are people who would enjoy the central city, who would benefit from the opportunity to come and experience the central city the way that it works now, and a reorientation and a reconnection with the central city. There are people that haven't had the confidence to come and spend much time in the central city even since the earthquakes, and we need that to start happening. Yes, this is a subsidy, but it's a subsidy using our own assets, our own car parks, which are owned by council, to bring about a benefit for the central city. If we didn't own those car parks, we wouldn't be able to do that. It's something we can do for a short time, and I think it's important that we remember that today we're making a decision, assuming we do this for a short time, and any decision about an extension will be taken at that time. I would hate for councillors to oppose this today because they don't agree with an extension when we're actually going to be making a separate decision about an extension at that time. And I think the important point to make about any extension consideration is that we need to be using the 4 months of this trial to capture good data so that we can make a well-informed decision at this time. But what we've got in front of us today, as I see it, is an opportunity and an incentive. It's an opportunity and incentive for people to come into town and reconnect with the central city. Clearly there's an opportunity for the central city businesses, and there are some of those businesses absolutely need that opportunity. But it's an opportunity for the people of the city and to have an incentive to come back and reconnect. There's an education and behavioural change element, I think, to this as well. Pre-earthquake, on-street parking was the norm. Post-earthquake, using parking buildings is the norm. And that's something that people perhaps need to have an incentive to have that experience, to become used to, where the parking buildings are, how you get to them, how you use them when you get there, where the entrance is, where the exit is, all of that sort of thing, just so that people get over the change between on-street and off-street parking, that they've actually got the confidence to drive into that building and front up to the barrier arm, knowing that they're confident to use that particular facility. I actually think this is a really good idea. I think the timing is perfect. We're going to be covering the Christmas period and the summer period when the city would naturally be busy, and we hope that this would make it busier. Gives us time to run a trial, gives us time to capture the data that we need to have a really sensible conversation about whether this is something that we would want to continue beyond that, or whether there are in fact other things we could be doing to help the regeneration and revitalisation of the central city.
Vicky, then Sarah. I think that we actually need to take people along with us in terms of changing the dynamic of the central city. We're altering it so that it is prioritises pedestrians, bikes, public transport, but we need to ensure that people who live in the city actually feel confident about coming into the central city and have the chance to explore all that the central city has to offer. I love the 30k speed limit in the central city because I find so much new and exciting that I couldn't possibly be travelling any faster while I'm looking at all the changes that are happening around. But I'm very aware that some people don't feel so confident about where those car parking buildings are, how those, as Andrew said, how those car parking buildings operate, how you get from the car parking building to the shops or the coffee shop that you want to go to. And I think it's really important that we recognise that the central city is the central city and we want people to be part of it. So I like the short-term nature of this. It will take us into Christmas shopping, it will take us into summer times and into the buskers when a whole lot of people will be coming into town.
I think we owe it actually to the people who've been brave enough to develop in the central city, particularly retail developers in the central city, to actually make it easy for people to come in and explore all of the amazing things that the central city has to offer. I tried the new supermarket that's open by the bus exchange the other day and watched people coming in and out of the crossing car park and channeling all the goods that they didn't realise that they were going to be buying at such a lovely supermarket into their car in several different journeys. Because there are lovely things that you will find in the central city that make it so worthwhile. And I think we have a sort of Christchurch bias against paying for car parking, and once we overcome that and become familiar with what's here, we will so want to come into the central city that the work will be done. But I really think in terms of helping the central city after such a long period of not being as open and vibrant and available to people as we've had, I mean, I was shocked when we opened Imagination Station, and because we didn't have any staff, I had to work for the first week or 10 days, and those people coming into that Imagination Station had not been into the central city at all, and we're still finding that. I think it's really important that we actually advertise the fact that it's easy to get in. Yes, you can park your car if you have to come by car, and yes, there are options, and yes, it's way worth the journey.
Yep. Sarah.
Thank you. Those who know me and follow my Facebook page will be really surprised that I'm in favour of subsidising parking, because it's not my normal behaviour. But actually I am in favour of this, and I'm in favour of 4 months that will see us through that Christmas and buskers period. For me, the key thing is about that behaviour change. And getting people away from the mindset that they need an on-street park outside the shop that they're visiting and into an off-street car parking building is really important. The key thing with Litchfield Street actually is that it's really familiar. You know, people used to go and park in Litchfield Street pre-quake. They're used to going to that kind of space, used to going into a car parking building there. And once they've done that in a familiar space, they will work out the other car parking buildings that are on offer. The subsidy is really interesting, and having an hour's free will be really useful. It's really interesting that some of the discussion is around the fact that some of the other car parking operators were concerned because they thought that an hour free at Litchfield Street would draw people away from a car parking building that might actually be closer to the shop that they want to go to. And that means we've actually come a long way, because people are recognising that people walk for a good offer. You know, you don't go to a mall and park outside the shop you want to go to. You drive around looking for a park, and then you walk through the mall to the shop you want to go to. And people will do that in town because the offering in town is really special. So having that behaviour change, getting people away from the mindset that they need a park on street close to the shop into the Litchfield Street car parking building will be really, really good. We know from evidence all over the world that like a 5p or a 10-cent levy on plastic bags will stop people using them by 75%, and that's a tiny amount of money. Imagine what $1's going to do, you know, or an hour free parking. Once people get away from the mindset that they need to be on street, they're going to argue less about the removal of on-street parking. And so as we make our city more cycle-friendly, more pedestrian-friendly, people will be less resistant to that, and so that's why I'm in favour of this.
Yeah. Mike?
Thank you, and I guess a lot's already been said, so I'll be supporting this, and it is a shame that we sort of went to a bit of a cycle versus car debate partway through this, because I'm fully supportive of cycleways and what we're doing to actually move people in that direction, but we need to be realistic and realise people need to drive as well. There is quite a large percent of people that will not be able to use bikes, will not be able to use public transport, and will be using cars. And I have never ever thought that we should be trying to just steer people into one mode of transport or two modes, but actually just try and create a modal shift and realise that there is a demand, a need for car use. And like Councillor Templeton said, what we need to do is actually incentivise people who have to drive into town to actually go into the car parking buildings and not use the on-street car parks, because once we get used to doing that, then it's going to be a lot easier to actually create a much more accessible city that's free for walking and biking. And when we remove these cars off the roads, it's happened overseas all over the place. Once they incentivise actual off-street car parking, the removal of on-street car parking is actually really, really easy. So I'll be supporting this. It's good to see it's only for 4 months so we can evaluate and see how it went, but I look forward to seeing it.
Jamie, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, love to. Look, we have a central city that right now is still 1/4 vacant. You know, and that's not even counting the undeveloped sites. Post-quake, we had a city that was in lockdown, and it's open now, and whilst we're not quite there yet, we are moving in the right direction, and I'm really encouraged by it. Our city's going to be world-class, and there's some very cool pockets already, but people need to come in to experience it. And I think that when they come into the city and try it, it might pleasantly surprise them. Look, 80% of people do travel by car. That's the reality of it today. And that's not to say that we can't encourage alternate modes of transport or that we can't aspire to change those habits over time. But that doesn't happen immediately, and right now today it can never be an either or. Otherwise we've failed before we've already begun. I obviously strongly support this approach because it's the right thing to do. It'll help build back the habits of people returning to the central city. It'll help ensure that the car parking prices aren't being gouged. It'll help build those habits for people to actually realise that it's not that bad to not get a park right outside where you want to go, but to get off street. And it will help introduce people to some new roading layouts that are, in all honesty, considerably different than what they used to be or from what a lot of people may have been used to. We have less car parking buildings, council car parking buildings, than we did pre-quake, and sadly it's probably costing people more money to park in the central city than it did before the earthquake as well. So this isn't carte blanche free like the suburbs. It's not even 2 hours free like it was pre-earthquake. But if we do our job right and the offer is compelling in the central city, you know, I see that this as being something that could be even self-supporting, as the revenue recouped at the back end of it will hopefully offset the incentive or the cherry on top at the beginning. Because if that offering is good, you know, hopefully people do stay longer than 60 minutes and they come in here and have a wander around and enjoy all the city has to offer and stay for 2-3 hours. So the press ran a poll on this, and they actually had a really large response. And it was 48% of respondents said yes, they want 1 hour free parking. 47% said yes, but they want more. So that's 95% support. This is what our people want. 5% of respondents said no, it's not fair on the private car parking operators. So yes, this does mean that the third-party parking operators will have to lower their prices to remain competitive. So funnily enough, although not unanimous, the majority of even the car parking operators supported this as they appreciated the greater good and they felt that this would be good for Christchurch and good for everyone as it grows the pie. So my view is that we always need to be looking at the greater good, you know, and for a central city to work, we need people to come in and experience it. So this isn't the silver bullet, it's a simple initiative, but don't underestimate the difference that I think that this will make to entice people back into the central city. If you approve this, it will ensure that a full report comes back to us about whether or not it could be extended. It'll have a baseline that will be established within these 4 months, so we've got some real data to work with. You know, and like I said, this allows people to change the habits of coming back into town. It helps create a reason for people to come back and to change the perception that you just need to park right outside the shop. So I say give Christchurch a Christmas present of 1 hour free parking for the city. And also I think it shows real support and backing to all those brave people that really took a punt against all the naysayers, and some of those naysayers were professional institutions that told them not to go into the central city or that wouldn't fund them to come into the central city. You know, I think there are a tremendous number of real heroes in Christchurch post-earthquake in the commercial space, and a good chunk of those have really put their money where their mouth is in the central city, and they've done it tough. So I think give this a go, and I think you'll be pleasantly surprised.
That's great. I'll put the motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. and abstentions. So Phil, abstention, opposed, Yanni. That's lovely. That's carried. Thank you very much. I'd like to now move that we go into the PX part of the agenda with Rob Hall of Development Christchurch remaining for the progress report that was referred to earlier. I'll move that, seconded by Andrew. I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. Oh, good work everyone, 1 o'clock. So we'll be back here at 2 o'clock.